There's a man out there in the forest who looks exactly like me. Not just similar, not just close. Exactly. Same uniform. Same stitched name tag, Ranger Joel Harker. Same forest-worn boots I'd broken myself over 6 miserable winters. Same burn scar across the left wrist from when I grabbed a hot skillet too fast at base camp. The first time I saw him, I thought it was a joke. Some social media prank. But he didn't speak. Just stared at me from the tree line, head tilted slightly, studying me like a puzzle he was almost done solving. Then he ran. Not just any run, he moved like a wild animal. No crunch of leaves. No stumble. Just a gone. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, I found things moved around in my ranger cabin. Half-written reports I don't remember starting. A toothbrush in the sink when I hadn't used it all day. I even got called into the supervisor's office last week because someone, apparently me, had checked in and out of the fire tower during a night shift. I wasn't even on duty. They showed me the logbook. My signature was there. My handwriting. Except I hadn't written it. Something is in this forest with my face, my walk, my voice. And I don't know what it wants to replace me or become me. But last night I saw it again. Closer this time. Smiling wide. And this time I was the one standing in the tree line. Or at least, that's what the other rangers say. I've worked in Black Hollow Forest for nearly 12 years. It's not the kind of place that ends up on Instagram feeds or travel brochures. No sweeping vistas, no scenic pullovers with picnic benches. Just dense, quiet wilderness that feels like it never wanted to be found in the first place. The kind of forest that drinks in sound and never spits it back. Where the fog rolls in so thick and low some mornings, it feels like you're wading through ghosts. But I loved it. Genuinely. Black Hollow was mine. I knew her moods. I could tell you which part of the ridge would catch wind first, which trail flooded earliest in spring thaw, which hollow birthed the earliest owls in late August. I knew her like a mother knows a child. And I was alone with her most of the time, which suited me just fine. Solitude breeds clarity, or so I thought, until the day it bred something else. It was just past 4 in the afternoon when dispatch radioed in. Joel, family of 4, got turned around near Copper Basin. GPS dropped. Last ping put them somewhere off Ridgeback Trail. I cursed softly under my breath, clipped the radio back to my vest, and zipped up my parka. Ridgeback Trail was rough terrain, narrow, muddy this time of year, and one of the easiest places to get lost if you took one wrong fork. I was halfway up the east path when I saw movement to my left. Not animal movement, this was upright. Deliberate. Just a flash of tan and green between the trees. Another ranger. Maybe McLean on overlap? I stepped off trail to get a better look, heart thumping a little harder than it should have. That's when I saw him. Standing maybe 20 feet away. My exact height, same weather-stained jacket, same issued boots, same faded Ranger service name tag stitched over the chest. Harker. My first thought was prank. My second, impossible. Because even in the fading light, I could see the small details, the burn scar on his wrist, barely visible beneath the glove cuff. The way his mouth curled slightly at one corner, the faintest sneer built into his resting face. My resting face. He looked like me. Exactly like me. For a full 5 seconds, we just stared at each other. No movement. No sound. Just 2 versions of the same man locked in some silent, mirrored standoff. Then he tilted his head, ever so slightly, not confused, more like he was examining me, studying a specimen. And then, without a word, he ran. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was the instinct to not let the weird thing escape. Maybe it was some primitive response to chase what you don't understand. But I bolted after him. He was fast. Too fast. He weaved between trees with inhuman precision, ducked under branches like he knew which ones I'd hit, avoided routes like he'd mapped the forest 100 times over. Every step I took seemed to land just a second too late. It was like I was chasing a version of me who was better at being me. Branches lashed my face. My boots skidded on a slick patch of moss. I nearly ate dirt twice but kept going, driven by this terrifying mix of adrenaline and confusion and dread. Then suddenly, silence. I burst into a clearing and stopped. Nothing. No figure. No footsteps. No heavy breathing. He was gone. Just like that. But something else was there. In the exact center of the clearing, resting on a flat rock, was a plastic ID badge. My bed. The one I'd lost nearly 3 months ago, during a storm sweep down near Willow Creek. I turned the ranger station upside down looking for it, finally filed a report, got a new one issued. Figured it fell into the water, or some hiker snatched it. But here it was. Pristine. Untouched. Except, I stepped closer. My boots crunched gently over frostbitten grass. My breath puffed out like smoke. And I saw it. My face on the ID. But the expression was wrong. I never smiled in that photo. Never had. I'd taken it after a night shift. Groggy, irritated. But on this badge, I was grinning. Not a polite picture day smile. No, a wide, gleaming, teeth-bared smile. Unnatural. Too wide. It made me take a step back. And then the wind died. Completely. Back at the station, I kept my mouth shut. My hands were still shaking when I signed in. Ranger McLean was pouring burnt coffee into a chipped ceramic mug by the stove. He gave me a once-over. "You look like hell," he said. "Got winded." "Chased a mountain lion off Ridgeback," I lied. He smirked, raised the mug to his lips. Must have been a quiet one then. No roars on the radio. I forced a half-laugh. Yeah, must have. He leaned over to the check-in clipboard on the wall. "By the way, you signed out the tower last night, right?" I froze. "What?" "The fire tower. 1:17 a.m. sign-in. Signed out just past 3. That wasn't you." I walked over. Looked at the paper. Joel Harker. My handwriting. Neat and slanted just like mine. But I hadn't been on shift. I hadn't even left my cabin. "I've been off duty since Sunday," I said quietly. He gave me a look. "You sure? You think I wouldn't remember a night shift?" We both stared at the clipboard. Neither of us spoke. Something cold settled in my gut, like ice water pouring down my spine. That night, I triple-locked the door to my ranger cabin. I shut the blinds, shoved the dresser against the entrance. I even left the porch light on, something I never do. But I couldn't shake it. That face, that smile, that feeling like I'd been replaced in some subtle way. Like something else had worn my skin for just a moment, walked through my day like trying on clothes. And if it could sign my name, walk in my boots, use my voice, then what else could it do? As I lay in bed, the silence pressed against the walls of the cabin. The kind of silence that doesn't just settle, it listens. I didn't sleep. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps on the gravel outside. But when I crept to the window, heart in my throat, there was nothing. Just trees and shadows, and the faint smell of my aftershave on the breeze. The next morning, I woke up with dirt under my fingernails. That's not metaphorical. Actual moist, dark soil jammed beneath every nail, like I'd clawed at the forest floor in my sleep. My sheets were clean. My boots were dry. But my hands, they told another story. I spent 10 minutes under the cabin faucet, scrubbing until my skin turned red and raw. The smell of pine needles and earth lingered even as I dried my hands. It wasn't just a fluke. This was escalating. Things started going missing. Small stuff at first. A flashlight I'd left by the window. Gone. My field notes for the week. Disorganized. Pages out of order. One page had a drawing I didn't remember sketching, a crude outline of a man's face, grinning with too many teeth. I hadn't drawn it. At least, I don't think I did. Then came the wet toothbrush. It was still dripping in the sink when I came back from patrol. I hadn't brushed my teeth yet. I hadn't even been in the cabin. I tried to stay rational. I really did. Stress, burnout, maybe even sleepwalking. It was the only explanation I could accept. The alternative, that something was stalking me with my own face, was insanity, right? Then Ranger Dana walked into the mess hall 2 days later and shattered that theory like glass. She was gripping a thermos and looking pale. "You could have at least waved back," she said, not even looking at me. I blinked. "What?" "This morning. Near Devil's Spine Trailhead. You passed me around 6:15. I called out. You didn't even flinch." I shook my head. "Dana, I've been in the southern stretch all morning. I didn't even leave base until after 7. She stared at me. "No, Joel. You were walking toward the old watchtower. Same jacket. Same limp on your right step. Same damn thermos you always use." I held mine up. Still half full. Still warm. Her face went pale. I didn't argue. I didn't deny it. I just turned and left. Because now I wasn't the only one seeing him. The next time was worse. Supervisor Yarrow radioed me on Thursday, voice clipped and confused. "Joel, why do you ask for the observation tower keys again? You were just up there 2 nights ago." I was silent for a beat. "I didn't ask for them." Pause. "I handed them to you myself, man." Later that afternoon, when I returned to base, he showed me the tower log. My name again, written in my own hand. The shift, 11:52 p.m. to 2:45 a.m. He even had radio logs. My voice, giving check-ins every 30 minutes. Calm. Normal. Nothing strange. But I don't remember a second of it. That night I barely kept it together. I sat in my cabin, heart pounding, lights on full blast. Every creak in the wooden walls felt like it echoed directly in my chest. Then I noticed the boots by the door. Muddy, caked with pine needles. But I hadn't left the cabin all day. And when I looked closer, there were 2 sets of prints. My boots, side by side. One dry, one wet, one clean, one filthy. Like 2 versions of me had stood there. The next morning, I found something that made my stomach turn. The inside of my front door had scratch marks, 5 long gouges raked vertically down the wood. Not from an animal. These were deliberate, almost neat, too high off the ground to be a raccoon or even a bear. I live alone. I touched them gently. Splinters came off like the wounds were fresh. The door had been locked all night. Deadbolt. So how? My hand started to shake. And then came the dreams. Or maybe they weren't dreams. It started one night with me walking through the forest, fog curling low over the undergrowth. My own flashlight cutting through the mist. I was patrolling or searching. Always searching. For what I never knew. And in the distance, I'd see him. My silhouette, standing still between the trees. Not facing me. Never facing me. Just waiting. I'd shout. Sometimes I'd run toward him. But every step I took seemed to push him further away. He glided backward through the woods like he was on rails, just out of reach. And then he'd stop and turn, and his face would be almost mine, but not. The skin hung too tight across the jaw. The eyes were too wide, pure black, pupil and all. The smile worked, as if someone who'd never truly smiled was trying to imitate one. Then he'd open his mouth, and I'd wake up, gasping, soaked in sweat, with dirt on my socks, and a pine needle under my tongue. I tried to tell myself I was just losing sleep, that this was my brain playing tricks on me, manifesting anxiety as hallucinations. But that stopped working the night I caught my own reflection lagging. I was in the supply shed grabbing a field scope when I passed the cracked mirror mounted to the back door. I moved. My reflection moved a second late. Not a blink. Not a smudge. A full second delay. I dropped the scope. Spun around. Nothing. But in the corner of the mirror as I backed away, I swore I saw a hand press against the other side of the glass. Just for a moment. Then gone. By the weekend, I was spiraling. I avoided the other rangers. I stopped sleeping in the cabin and started taking naps in my truck during daylight. I even called my brother in Spokane and tried to explain, but as soon as I said, "Someone's out here wearing my face," he got quiet. Too quiet. "Joel, are you sure you're not just overworked?" He didn't believe me. I could hear it in his voice. I didn't blame him. Hell, I didn't believe myself some days. But the fear, that was real. The gnawing, gut-deep dread that something was crawling into the cracks of my life and slipping into my place while I wasn't looking. One night, I decided I'd catch it. Set up 3 motion-activated trail cams, one pointing at the path to my cabin, one inside the ranger tower, and one staring right into my own bedroom window from the tree line. I pretended to sleep. 2:48 a.m. I heard the steps. Heavy boots on the porch. Slow. Deliberate. Then a knock. Then another. I stayed frozen. "Joel," a voice whispered soft and raspy through the wood. It was my voice. Exactly my voice. "Joel, it's me." I forgot my key. Another knock. Then silence. I waited a full 5 minutes before I dared to breathe. Just when I thought it was over, the radio on my nightstand crackled. "Joel, why aren't you responding?" It was my voice again. Calm, impatient, then static. I didn't sleep again after that. At dawn, I sprinted out to collect the SD cards. Nothing at the supply shed. Nothing at the tower. Then I plugged in the card from the camera facing my window. At first, just empty trees, moving branches. Then a figure stepped into view. Me, wearing my jacket, my hat, my face. He stared into the lens, and he smiled. But his smile was wrong. It stretched too far up to the cheekbones, like the skin didn't fit right. And the eyes. There were no whites, just black. 2 voids where my soul should have been. He raised a hand and waved, the exact way I wave on patrol. I've seen myself do it in 100 photos. Then he leaned forward, lips almost touching the lens, and whispered something. I played it back, cranked the volume, filtered the noise, slowed it down. 4 words. "I like your skin." After the camera footage, something broke inside me. I didn't eat that day. Barely drank. Just stared at my laptop screen, replaying the moment again and again, his face smiling into the lens, my voice whispering that awful sentence. "I like your skin." It didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a compliment. Like he meant it. That night, I bolted my windows shut, pulled the dresser in front of the door again, sat in the corner of my cabin with my flashlight on, an axe across my lap. I didn't blink for what felt like hours. But what finally got me out of that corner wasn't fear. It was rage. I needed to know what it wanted. Why me? Why this place? Why now? And most of all, what was it? The next morning, I visited Supervisor Yarrow under the guise of reviewing patrol coverage. I needed access to the fire tower, the one I apparently signed into during those missing nights. Maybe if I retraced its steps, I could catch a thread of whatever had slipped through the cracks in my memory. He gave me a strange look, but handed me the key ring. "You good, Harker?" I nodded. "Just restless." He hesitated. "Your eyes look different." I froze. "What do you mean?" "Just tired, I guess," he muttered. Never mind. But I knew he was wrong. It wasn't me whose eyes had changed. I hiked up to the fire tower that afternoon. The climb was longer than I remembered. Every footstep up the creaking stairs echoed like it was being mimicked a half-beat behind me. I found myself glancing over my shoulder again and again, expecting to see myself close behind. The tower was empty, cold, smelled of wet timber and dried sweat. I stepped inside, unlatched the window, and looked out over Black Hollow Forest. Endless green. So peaceful. So deceptive. This place had hidden something unnatural in its roots. I opened the logbook on the desk. Sure enough, there it was. Joel Harker, 1:17 a.m. to 3:02 a.m. The handwriting was mine. Not just similar, perfect. Even the little curl I add to my capital H was there. Except the signature looked a little too steady. A little too confident. Like whoever wrote, it had practice being me. I picked up the radio and tried hailing base. No response. Just soft static, like breathing through cloth. Then the window creaked behind me. I turned fast. No one there. But in the glass, a reflection. Not mine. His. I didn't scream. I don't know why. I just stared. He stood behind me. Or at least his reflection did. The real room was empty. But in the reflection, he was standing perfectly still, shoulder to shoulder with me, watching with those obsidian eyes, jaw slack and twitching. My first instinct was to move away. But in the reflection, I didn't. In the reflection, I leaned closer. His hand rose, pressed to the inside of the glass. Mine didn't move. He mouthed something. The words invisible. Silent. Then he did something I still can't explain. He tilted his head, just like the first day I saw him. Then he blinked, one eye at a time, out of sync. Like he hadn't quite mastered blinking yet. Then the glass cracked. Just once. A hairline split across the center of the window, like something had pushed from the inside. I stumbled back, fell into the chair, heart clawing at my ribs. When I looked up again, the reflection was gone. But the crack in the glass? Still there. I touched it. Cold. Too cold. I should have left the tower right then and there. But something in me, curiosity, obsession, stupidity, made me stay. I pulled out my notebook and started listing everything I knew. It looked like me. It moved like me, but better. It could mimic my voice on the radio in person, maybe more. It had been inside my cabin. It knew my handwriting, my expressions, my routines. It had begun interacting with others. I circled one line twice. It's replacing me. Not killing me. Replacing me. Why? To live in my skin. To infiltrate the Ranger Corps. To hide in plain sight. I didn't know. But something told me it was close now. Closer than it had ever been. When I got back to my cabin, the dresser I'd shoved against the door was pushed 2 inches off alignment. That was all. 2 inches. But I hadn't touched it. And when I checked the bathroom mirror, there was something written in the fog, like someone had taken a hot shower. 4 words, faint but legible. Let me finish changing. I left the cabin that night. Took my truck. Didn't tell anyone. Just drove. But something was off. The gas tank read lower than it should have. The driver's seat was pushed back. The glove box was open, and inside it, a crumpled napkin with something scrawled in Sharpie. Zone Delta 3 p.m. I didn't write that. Didn't even know where Zone Delta was. But my name was on it. And I recognized the handwriting. Mine. I pulled out an old Ranger map. Zone Delta was a section of forest that had been sealed off years ago due to a wildfire. Restricted access. No trails. No patrols. Just a square of untouched, ash-blasted terrain swallowed by regrowth. But now the road was cleared. Like someone had been preparing. I drove there. Because of course I did. Because when something steals your face, your voice, your life, You don't run. You go where it leads. Zone Delta didn't feel like part of the forest anymore. The trees were too tall, and they leaned inwards like they were listening. The sky dimmed unnaturally fast. My headlights seemed swallowed by the dark instead of cutting through it. Eventually, the dirt road ended. I killed the engine. Got out. Windless silence. Then I saw the clearing. Perfectly circular. And in the middle, a mirror. An old, ornate mirror mounted on a blackened wooden frame between two trees. Who put it there? How long had it been sitting like that? And most of all, why did it show me something else? Because when I stepped forward, it didn't reflect me. It reflected him. He was already there, inside the glass, grinning, waiting. His every movement matched mine, but always just a little off, like someone watching footage of me and trying to act it out from memory. I lifted my hand. He lifted his a second too late. I lowered mine. He waved, but not like a greeting. It was a farewell. And then I saw what was behind him. Long, pale hands, fingers like branches, curling around his shoulders. A faceless thing pressed against the back of the mirror. No nose, just folds of skin, stretched like wet leather. A raw, twitching smile carved into the meat of its face. It was wearing him, and he was smiling like it didn't hurt anymore, like he'd let it in. Then the mirror started to warp. The glass rippled, like heat rising off pavement. The reflection of the forest twisted, branches melting into smoke, sky bending like plastic. And my reflection, no, his stepped forward. Closer, closer, until his forehead pressed against the other side, like he could almost push through. And I swear to God, for a split second, I was on the inside. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the ranger station bunk with my boots on, the shotgun propped against the wall, eyes fixed on the front door. Every creak of the old wooden floorboards felt like a countdown. I should have radioed out, filed a report, requested backup, done something. But how the hell do you explain I saw myself watching myself in the woods without getting pulled off duty and evaluated? I kept thinking about the moment our eyes met, how it tilted its head just slightly, like it was testing something, mimicking an emotion, mimicking me. When the sun rose, I convinced myself I dreamt the whole thing, or hallucinated. Or maybe it was some local who'd broken in and stolen my gear, except the logbooks were untouched, the gun rack sealed, the uniform accounted for. No one had been there, except me, except not me. That morning, I forced myself back out to Site 13. My steps were slower, my senses sharper. In the forest, it was too quiet. No birdsong, no wind, just that oppressive stillness, like the world was holding its breath. I circled the perimeter, finding no sign of a second visitor. No footprints, no gear, not even the rotten odor from before. But the tent was still there, flapping gently in the breeze. I don't know what I expected to find inside. Maybe proof that I'd imagined it. Instead, I found something else entirely. A journal. It had been tucked beneath the sleeping bag, partially torn and water-damaged, its pages covered in frantic, looping handwriting. Page after page of, "It's still outside. It looks like me. Don't trust its voice." It called my name with my own voice. I dropped the book like it burned me. I couldn't breathe. My hands were shaking. The wind pushed through the tent again, and for a moment it sounded like whispering. My name, but not my voice. My voice, just wrong. That night, I locked every door and window, turned on every light. The station felt like a coffin. I left the radio on just to hear another voice, even if it was weather reports and static. At 2:13 a.m., the motion sensor on the porch clicked. I froze. There was a camera on that sensor, standard protocol. It took stills every 5 seconds when triggered. I forced myself to check the feed. 5 frames. First frame, empty porch. Second, movement, shadow on the right. Third, me standing at the window. Fourth, me again, this time closer, face pressed to the glass. Fifth, smiling. I wasn't smiling. I rushed to the window. Nothing, just night. But in the sixth frame, a new one had been captured. It was looking directly at the camera. I slammed the monitor off. I couldn't look at it anymore. Couldn't look at myself. The next day, I did the only thing I could think of. I hiked to the nearby research cabin, about 6 miles away. Hoped the satellite uplink would let me send something to HQ without using the radio. I didn't want my voice out there. Not anymore. It was noon by the time I arrived. The cabin was empty as expected. The researchers had left the week prior, but the systems were still online. I logged into the secure terminal. Type 1 line. Possible impersonator in sector. Urgent extraction requested. I paused, then deleted it. Typed again. I think something is pretending to be me. My finger hovered over the enter key. Then I heard it. From just outside the cabin. My voice. Hey, it's me, open up. I forgot my keys. My blood turned to ice. The voice was perfect. Same cadence. Same accent. Same lazy drawl I'd picked up from years of field work. I didn't move. Didn't answer. Just backed away from the door, silently praying it would go away. Knock, knock. Then softer. Come on, man. Don't be weird. You know it's me. I waited. Eventually, the knocking stopped. But the voice didn't. For the next 6 hours, it circled the cabin, talking to me, as me, quoting old jokes I told, humming the songs I like to whistle while hiking, even mocking the way I cleared my throat when nervous. And then, at sundown, it said one last thing. Don't forget who you are. You'll sound just like me soon. Then it was gone. That night, I fell asleep clutching the flare gun. I dreamed of mirrors that moved before I did. Reflections with independent thoughts. I dreamed I was staring into a lake and my own face smiled up at me from beneath the surface. When I woke up, I wasn't sure who I was anymore. The next day, the sun came up like nothing had happened. The forest glistened in dew and golden light, but I couldn't shake the weight of the night before, the way the forest had fallen unnaturally silent, how the calls came back just wrong. I kept replaying it in my mind as I brewed my morning coffee at the ranger outpost, hands trembling. I told myself maybe I'd imagined it. I hadn't gotten much sleep, and out here, the isolation can make you see and hear things. But when I stepped outside, I froze. Footprints. In the dirt, just beneath my window. Human footprints, barefoot, leading from the tree line straight up to the cabin. Then they vanished. No return trail. No disturbance in the pine needles around them. Just a dead stop under my window, like whoever or whatever it was had come to watch me in the night. I radioed base. Told them I needed a partner for the next few shifts, citing possible bear activity and personal safety concerns. Standard language. I didn't want to sound crazy. The request was approved, but they couldn't send anyone until Friday. It was Tuesday. 3 more nights alone. That evening, I forced myself back onto patrol. I told myself I wouldn't take the North Trail, but my feet led me there anyway. The forest seemed to lean in around me now. It listened, waited. The deeper I walked, the more I felt like I was being studied. About 3 miles in, I saw it again. A flash, just a flicker of movement behind a tree. I called out, "Hey, you need assistance." No response. My breath quickened. I circled around with slow, measured steps, hand resting on my bear spray. When I rounded the trunk, no one was there. But stuck into the bark with a small stick was a park ranger name tag. It was mine. I checked my chest. My tag was still there, pinned securely to my jacket. But this one was identical. Same name, Same scratches. Even the little crack on the edge where I dropped it last winter. My mouth went dry. I backed away slowly, eyes scanning the brush. That's when the smell hit me. Like rot, wet animal fur, old blood, and something sweet, like burnt sap. It was cloying and wrong, sticking in my throat. Something moved up ahead. Not a rustle, something bigger. A shape? I raised my flashlight. The beam caught on something pale. A face. My face. It ducked behind a tree, but I saw enough. The skin was wrong, too tight like stretched leather. The mouth moved in slow, jerky twitches, and the eyes were milky, glassy, like they hadn't blinked in hours. I turned and ran. No trail. Just instinct. I barreled downhill, branches slashing at my arms. I didn't stop until I saw the outline of my cabin through the trees, barely visible in the last light. As I fumbled for my key, something whispered behind me. Not in front. Not beside. Right behind my ear. I like this face. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I locked every door and window, shoved the couch against the back door, and sat in the corner of the living room with my shotgun across my lap. I watched the walls like they might melt. I jumped at every sound, the creak of wood, the whisper of wind, the distant groan of the forest. Nothing came through the door, but something scraped across the roof just before dawn. Soft, like fingers. When the sun rose, I thought about leaving. Hiking out, cutting my contract short, filing a mental health report just to justify disappearing. But when I opened the cabin door, my boots hit something soft. A dead raccoon, split from throat to belly. Its insides were neatly arranged in the dirt, spine curled like a question mark. Liver on one side, heart still steaming. Next to it, scratched into the mud with what looked like claws, were 4 words. It fits. So well. My hands went cold. My name tag, the real one, was missing from my chest. I radioed again. Told base I was sick. Nausea, fever, whatever lie I could come up with. They offered to send a ride, but the signal crackled before I could answer. The last thing I heard before it cut out was a strange distortion on the line. A voice whispering through static. I like your voice too. I dropped the radio. My knees buckled. That night, I boarded the windows. Nailed them shut with the emergency planks we use during winter storms. I jammed towels in the cracks of the doors. Sat on the floor with every light in the cabin on. No shower. No sleep. Around 2 a.m., the lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then they died. My generator hadn't failed once all season. I lit a lantern. The glow was feeble, stretching shadows into monsters across the cabin walls. That's when I heard it again. Breathing. Not outside. Inside. Slow. Measured. Mimicking mine. I held my breath. The other breathing didn't stop. I stood, shotgun trembling in my grip, and walked toward the bedroom. It was sitting on my bed, wearing my uniform. Its face, my face, was grinning too wide, the lips split at the corners like its skin had torn from stretching. It blinked, and in my voice it said, "I've been practicing." I screamed and fired. The shot lit the room like lightning. Smoke. Splinters. The thing flew backward against the wall with a crunch. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing there. No blood. No body. Not even a dent in the drywall. But my bed was soaked. Soaked in sweat. And sitting in the corner, barely visible in the lantern's last glow, was my name tag, covered in teeth marks. The name tag sat there for hours. I didn't dare touch it. It was chewed, gnawed, like some animal had gnashed at it, but the bite radius wasn't right. The marks were human-sized, but irregular. Too many teeth, too sharp. Something was playing with me, mocking me. I kept whispering to myself, "You're still you. You're still real. You're still in control." But the line between me and it was fading, like my thoughts weren't fully my own anymore. By morning, I was hallucinating, or so I thought. I looked into the bathroom mirror, and my reflection was lagging, moving a half second behind me. I turned my head left. It waited, then copied the movement like it had to remember how. Then it smiled. I wasn't smiling. I punched the mirror hard. Glass shattered. Blood ran down my wrist, and my reflection blurred with 1,000 fractured versions of me, each one smiling wider. I wrapped my hand, told myself I was sleep deprived. That was all. But then I started getting visitors. They weren't supposed to be here. My cabin was off-grid and less called in, but on the third night after the mirror incident, I heard tires crunching on the gravel road. Truck. Government issue. I peeked through the slats of my boarded-up windows. 2 rangers I didn't recognize. Fresh uniforms. Not from our region. One of them got out and knocked. Officer Jarrett, he called. We got a report you missed 2 status checks. HQ sent us to retrieve you. My radio had been broken for days. I never missed a check. I stayed silent. He knocked harder. Sir, if you don't open up, we'll have to force entry. That's when I heard it. The second man, still standing by the truck. He was staring at the tree line, completely motionless. Then his head jerked, just once, and he whispered, "Which one are you?" He wasn't looking at the trees. He was looking straight at me. I backed away. My breath caught in my throat. He tilted his head, just slightly, and smiled, too wide, like it had learned how to wear someone else again. Before I could react, there was a crack against the front door axe. The first man was breaking in. I pointed the shotgun at the entrance and yelled, "I'm armed. This is private ranger property. Stay the hell back." He kept chopping. Another splinter. Then, silence. I stood there shaking. Then I heard footsteps on the roof. They were both up there now. Heavy boots pacing. Then running. Then one voice, in perfect unison, spoke through the chimney shaft. "You're the last piece we need." I didn't sleep that night either. By dawn, they were gone. No truck. No tracks. But the mirror in the bathroom, the one I had smashed, it was whole again, and I wasn't in it. I didn't look into the mirror again after that. I taped a blanket over it, but it didn't matter. Reflections started showing up where they didn't belong, in the glass of my coffee pot, the darkened windows at night, even the slick sheen of a lake puddle outside. And in every one of them, the same thing stared back. It looked like me. But it wasn't just a copy anymore. It was a better version of me. Healthier, sharper, more confident. Like the version I could have been if life hadn't scarred me inside and out. It wore my ranger uniform like it was tailored to it. No bloodstains, no sweat. It started smiling at me sympathetically, like it pitied me. And then one night it spoke. Not aloud. In my mind. "You don't have to be tired anymore." I dropped the mug in my hand. It shattered across the floor, burning coffee soaking into my boots. "Let go. I'll take care of the forest. I'll take care of the watch. I'll be you better." I screamed, told it to shut up. But its voice was softer than mine now, calmer, reassuring. The next morning, I found a note on my desk, written in my handwriting. "I've already been filling in for you. They like me more. They don't even know you're missing." That's when it became clear. The calls I thought weren't coming in, they were. I just wasn't the one answering them. I sprinted to the Radio Shack. When I threw the door open, my stomach twisted. The seat was warm. The logbook was filled in with my name and signature. Status checks, trail reports, visitor summaries. It had even updated the bear tracking grid and listed a recommendation to promote me to a regional command post. What's worse, I remember doing it. Except I didn't. Somehow the memories were slipping in like fog. I couldn't tell what I'd done and what it had done while wearing me. I ran out into the woods. I don't remember grabbing the flashlight, but I had it. I don't remember dressing, but I was fully geared. I just ran. Ran until the trees were older than language. Ran until the air turned electric and the leaves were whispering again. And there it was, the glade. The clearing I swore didn't exist. I stepped into it. The trees bowed inward. The light dimmed, not because the sun set, but because something was pulling it in. It stood at the center. Me, but more me than me. My face, my eyes, my boots, my hands. Except it glowed softly, a pulsing shimmer beneath the skin. Not light, not life, just the power. Give me back my face, I said. It tilted its head, not cruelly, like a teacher disappointed in a student. You already did. It opened its arms. I expected claws or fangs or an attack. Instead, it just said, "You came here because you're tired. Let go." And for a second, I almost did. I took one step toward it. My foot sank into the moss. Warmth pulsed through me. I saw a vision of my life from above, peaceful, steady, complete. No loss, no pain, just belonging. But then I heard my own voice behind me. Don't. I spun around. And there I was again. A third version. Bloodied, exhausted, wearing the bite-marked name tag. The version I'd forgotten I was. The real me. The two versions of me, the glowing imposter and the bloody survivor, stood on opposite sides of the clearing, and I was caught between them. The imposter smiled, serene as a monk, arms still open. You invited me in. The bloodied me was gasping. You never wanted this. It feeds on your want to escape. Don't you remember? And I did, all at once. That night I stared into the cracked mirror too long. That moment I whispered, I don't want this life anymore. That's when it came through. Not a creature. Not a ghost. Something older. A mimicry born from human despair. It needed permission. And I had given it just enough. That's how it got in. That's why it had my face. It didn't steal me. I abandoned myself. The glowing version stepped closer. You're unraveling. You left the post. You sleep through the calls. You forget what's real. Let me help. Bloodied me, real me, shook his head. You will disappear the moment he chooses you. He'll be gone. Forever. That's the price. And now it was my choice. Let go or fight to come back. Let the pain stop or prove I could still carry it. The glade pulsed with a low-frequency hum, a vibration behind my ribs. The air thickened with the weight of the decision. I looked at the bloodied me, weak, damaged, burdened. Then I looked at the glowing one, serene, pure, everything I wished I could be. And then I said, quietly but firmly, "You don't get to wear my scars." The mimic blinked. I lunged at it, not with fists, with intent. I grabbed its collar, my collar, and screamed everything it could never fake. The sound of years of loneliness, of frostbitten winters and empty cabins, of late nights holding dying hikers, of watching wolves howl over the body of my best friend, of being forgotten but still showing up. Its skin cracked, not like flesh, like glass. A seam opened from its scalp down to its belly, revealing nothing inside, just dark, gaping emptiness full of stars. The mimic tried to hold itself together. Wait, if you do this. But I didn't stop. I roared, and with one last surge, I tore my face off of it. It shrieked, not in pain, but in rage, the anger of something denied its feast. It crumbled in on itself like paper burning in reverse. Black mist folded into light. The glade shook, trees bent backward, the moss turned white. And then silence. The forest was still again. I opened my eyes. Only one me remained. Bleeding, trembling, but real. And I was alone. No reflections. No whispers. No glade. Just the forest. I made it back to the ranger station 3 days later, half delirious and crawling. They said I had wandered off during a routine patrol. They didn't find the clearing. Didn't find another me. Didn't believe anything about it. But I knew. I knew because the mirror in my bathroom, it still flickers. Some nights, when I'm too tired to fight sleep, I see a face in it. Not mine. Not anymore. Just waiting for me to forget who I am again. And next time, I don't think I'll survive pulling it off a second time. They said it was a mistake. That leaving me behind was just miscommunication, bad weather, and poor radio signal. A logistics error. But I don't believe that. Because by the time they found me, I wasn't alone anymore. Something else had found me first. And even now, back in civilization among people, I know it's still with me. Watching. Waiting. I don't say this lightly. I was the most level-headed ranger in Black Pines National Forest. No ghost stories, no tall tales, no paranoia. Just facts, safety drills, and emergency maps. But what happened to me on Night 6 changed everything. Let me take you back. We were on a week-long survey deep in the eastern sector. 5 of us. Radio tower updates. Trail rigging. Camp-to-camp hiking. Nothing out of the ordinary until the storm rolled in and split us up. I took shelter in Station Echo, an old half-buried outpost we no longer staffed. The others assumed I'd gone to High Bluff. That's where they sent the evac helicopter. When they realized I wasn't there, I'd already spent 4 nights alone in that station. Or at least, I thought I was alone. On Night 5, I heard scratching under the floorboards. On Night 6, I saw something watching me through the trees. It wore a human face, but not well. And on Night 7, I stopped trying to leave. Because the longer I stayed, the more I remembered something I should have never forgotten. Something I'd buried 19 years ago. Something that had been waiting patiently for me to return. You see, there are places in this world where the boundary between what is and what should never be grows thin. Black Pines is one of them. And Station Echo? That's where the boundary doesn't exist at all. I should have known better. The signs were all there. The way animals avoided that section of forest. How compasses spun wildly within a quarter-mile radius. The fact that we'd lost 3 hikers in that area over the past decade, all experienced outdoorsmen who simply vanished without a trace. But I was a ranger, trained to be logical, to explain away the unexplainable with weather patterns and wildlife behavior. I was wrong. Day 1 was smooth. The 5 of us, me, Chris, Leland, Jules, and Trish, hiked out from base camp with loaded packs and a tight schedule. We were covering remote terrain, verifying old fire breaks, checking for erosion, updating signs. Ranger stuff. Sleep under the stars, cook over sterno, log everything in waterproof notebooks. Chris was the lead, Jules the radio tech. I was second on maps and navigation. We moved like a well-oiled machine. I worked with this crew for 3 years. Chris was solid, military background, never missed a detail. Jules could coax a signal out of dead air if needed. Leland knew every plant species in a 100-mile radius. And Trish? She could read weather patterns like scripture. But day 3, the wind shifted. Barometer dropped fast. Trish radioed a warning. A pressure system was barreling toward us. Strong winds, ice, near-zero visibility. We had to shelter in place. This isn't just weather, Trish said, studying her instruments with a frown. Pressure's dropping too fast. Temperature gradient's all wrong. It's like the storm is focused. I remember laughing at that. Storms don't focus, Trish. They just happen. She gave me a look I'd never seen before. Worried. Almost scared. Will, I've been reading weather for 15 years. This isn't natural. We debated options. High Bluff Station was on higher ground and structurally solid. But I'd passed Station Echo earlier that morning, lower elevation, closer by 2 miles. Chris pulled out the map, studying the terrain with his tactical flashlight. We'll regroup at High Bluff once the storm clears. If you're closer to Echo, bed down there. We'll sweep by after extraction. You sure about that place? Leland asked, peering over Chris's shoulder. I've never seen any wildlife near Echo. Not even tracks. Always thought that was odd. Jules nodded. Radio reception's weird there, too. Gets all staticky even on clear days. But the storm was already hitting. Ice pellets stung our faces. The wind howled through the pines like something alive and angry. I'll be fine, I said. Echo's solid. I'll hunker down, wait it out. Fine. I knew Echo. It was dusty, small, but dry. Or so I thought. That night, the storm hit like a war drum. But as I fought my way towards Station Echo, something felt wrong beyond just the weather. The trees around me seemed to lean inward, as if they were trying to funnel me toward the station. And the wind, it didn't just howl. It whispered. I reached Station Echo half-soaked. Its door stuck, but I forced it open. The station reeked of mildew and old pine, but underneath was something else. Something sweet and rotten, like fruit left too long in the sun. Inside, 2 metal bunks, a half-busted desk, a map of the 1994 fire routes. Everything covered in a layer of dust that seemed too thick for how recently the station had been abandoned. No electricity, no heat, no real supplies. Just creaks and dripping noises from the corners. But the creaking wasn't random. It had a rhythm. Almost like breathing. I turned on my headlamp, unpacked my gear, and tried to settle in. The beam of light seemed dimmer here, as if the darkness was thicker than it should be. As I set up my sleeping bag, I noticed scratches in the wooden walls. Deep gouges, like claw marks. But they were too big for any animal native to these woods. And they were fresh. The first night was uneventful. Or at least, that's what I told myself. I ignored the way my breath fogged even though it wasn't that cold inside. I ignored how my compass needle spun wildly no matter where I placed it. And I definitely ignored the sound of something large moving around the perimeter of the station just after midnight. The second, less so. I woke up around 2:13 a.m. to the sound of footsteps on the roof. Just one, then two, then silence. But they weren't random footsteps. They were pacing, back and forth, measuring, like something was learning the dimensions of my shelter. I told myself it was wind, that maybe snow had fallen off a tree. But my breath wouldn't slow down, because those footsteps had weight behind them. Purpose. I grabbed my radio and tried to raise the others. Nothing but static. But within the static, I could swear I heard voices. Whispering. Too faint to understand, but urgent. I slept with my knife in my hand that night. And when I finally dozed off, I dreamed of being 6 years old again, standing in these same woods, making a promise I couldn't remember. By day 4, my radio was pure static. My food was running low. Snow had blown halfway up the cabin walls, sealing me in like a tomb. But that wasn't the worst part. I started hearing things. First in the daytime, like someone whispering behind the logs, just faint enough that you couldn't make out the words. The whispers came in waves, always when I was focused on something else. Setting up my gear, checking the weather, trying to get a signal. At first, I thought it was the wind through cracks in the walls. But wind doesn't know your name. And I swear I heard it whisper Will at least a dozen times that day. Then that night came the scratching. It started under the bunk. Slow, intentional, like fingernails dragging across wood, but deeper, more deliberate. I froze in my sleeping bag. The fire was out. My breath fogged the air. I grabbed my flashlight and slowly peered underneath the cot. Nothing. Bare floor. Dust. Almost droppings. Then I noticed the floorboards were warped in one spot. Swollen. As if something had pushed upward from beneath. The wood was darker there, stained with something that looked like old blood. I tapped one with my boot. The scratching stopped immediately. But in the silence that followed, I heard something else. Breathing. Slow and wet, coming from underneath the floor. I didn't sleep at all that night. Instead, I sat in the corner with my back to the wall, knife in one hand, flashlight in the other, watching that dark stain on the floor. Because I swear it was growing, spreading like spilled ink. And sometime around 4 a.m., I saw the floorboard flex. Just slightly, as if something underneath was testing its strength. By day 5, I was hallucinating. At least, that's what I told myself. I'd hear someone say my name, well, from just beyond the trees. I'd turn, and no one would be there. But the voice was getting clearer, more insistent. At noon, I went outside to try climbing the signal bluff. I needed height to catch any return signal. But mostly, I needed to get away from that stain on the floor, which had grown to the size of a dinner plate. The snow had stopped, but the forest was too quiet. No birds, no insects. Even the wind had died. The silence was so complete it made my ears ring. That's when I saw the man. He was standing deep in the trees, not moving, not waving, just staring, wearing a parka like ours. But the hood was too tight, the shoulders hunched, and the skin on his face. It was pulled too tight, like it had been dried and stretched over bone. And it didn't move when the wind did. His mouth was open, but no breath fogged the air. I blinked. Gone. But when I looked down, there were footprints in the snow leading from where he'd stood to the base of my tree. Fresh prints, still filling with powder. I ran back to the station, my heart hammering against my ribs. And the scratching started again. But this time, it wasn't just under the floor. It was in the walls, the ceiling, all around me, like the entire station was infested with something hungry. I pressed my ear to the floor, and I heard it clearly now. Not just breathing, whispering, multiple voices layered on top of each other, all saying the same thing. Let us up, let us up, let us up. I grabbed my camping shovel and started digging. I know how that sounds, but I had to know what was down there. What had been calling my name? The soil under the floorboard was soft, too soft, and warm, like something living. 3 feet down, my shovel hit something hard. Not rock, not root. Wood. I cleared away more dirt and found the edge of another wooden box, this one bigger than a coffin. And when I pressed my ear to it, I could hear movement inside, scratching, like dozens of fingernails clawing at the lid. That's when I remembered the dream from my childhood. The one I'd been having my whole life but could never quite recall when I woke up. I was 6 years old, lost in these woods, scared and crying, and something had found me. Something that promised to keep me safe if I did one small favor. Just move the dirt, it had whispered. Just open the box. Let us see the sky again. And I had, because I was 6 and scared and alone. But what I'd let out, it wasn't supposed to stay free. Desperate, I started digging through the drawers, looking for anything that might explain what was happening to me. That's when I found the old forest map, stuffed behind a warped shelf. It was hand-annotated, dated 1997, marked with 3 big X's. One of them was over Station Echo. But it wasn't just marked. It was circled in red ink, with arrows pointing to it from all directions, like a target. Scrawled beside it, "Don't return," sealed for a reason. Underneath was another note, barely legible. This is where the first child disappeared. He opened something under the floor. My blood turned to ice. But there was more. Pages and pages of notes tucked behind a map. Records. Incident reports. All unofficial. All handwritten. 1962. Tommy Brennan, age 7. Last seen playing near Echo Ridge. Found 3 days later, unharmed but changed. Parents report he stopped speaking for 6 months. When he finally talked, he claimed he made friends with the Whisper people who lived under the ground. 1978. Sarah Mitchell, age 9. Disappeared during family camping trip. Located at abandoned ranger station, claimed she'd been invited to help with something important. No memory of the 3 days she was missing. Suffered severe night terrors for years afterward. 1985. David Park, age 6. Found at Station Echo after extensive search. Initially appeared normal, but parents noticed behavioral changes. Would speak to empty rooms. Drew pictures of children with wrong faces. Obsessed with digging holes in the backyard. 1991. William Chin, age 6. I stopped reading. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the paper. William Chin. That was me. My maiden name before my parents divorced, and I took my stepfather's surname. I yanked up the warped floorboard with my knife. Underneath was black soil. Damp. But in the center, something buried. A small wooden box. Against every survival instinct I had, I dug it up. The wood was smooth, polished by decades of handling. Carved symbols cover its surface. Not letters, but something older. Something that hurt to look at directly. Inside, a cracked photo of a little boy. Smiling. Missing teeth. On the back. William, age 6. The first key. I dropped it. My name. My face. This was me. But underneath the photo was something else. A contract. Written in a child's handwriting. My handwriting. I, William, agree to let the Whisper people come up when I get big. They helped me when I was scared. They kept me safe. I will come back and open all the boxes when I'm grown up and strong enough to help them all. Signed, William, witnessed by the congregation below. I never remembered that photo being taken. I had no memory of this cabin. But the signature was definitely mine. I recognized the way I used to write my W's with the extra loop. But I suddenly remembered a nightmare I'd had all my life. A face at the end of my childhood bed. Whispers under my floor. A voice saying, "It's not time yet, but we'll wait. We're very good at waiting." And then I remembered what I buried when I was 6. When I was forced to forget. Bargain. Made in the dark. With things that should have stayed buried. The notes continued. All children show similar patterns. Memory suppression around the incident. Behavioral changes. And most importantly, they all return as adults. Something calls them back. Something that needs them to fulfill their childhood promises. Station Echo should be permanently closed. The boxes underneath should never be opened. The congregation below grows stronger with each child's promise and weaker with each broken covenant. If anyone reads this, evacuate the area. Don't let anyone stay overnight at Echo. The Whisper people are patient, but they're getting desperate. And desperate things do terrible things to get what they want. Ranger Susan Walsh, Station Commander, 1995 to 1997, last seen investigating Echo Ridge disturbances status, missing. At the bottom of the page, in different handwriting. Susan kept her promise, too. She's with us now, in the deep places. She's very happy. That's when I realized the truth. This wasn't just about me. How many children had been brought here over the decades? How many promises had been made? How many contracts signed in crayon and innocence? And how many adults have been called back to honor their childhood bargains? I was just the latest in a long line of keys. But I was also the strongest. The first one with the skills and knowledge to really set them free. The next night, I covered the box with my jacket and tried to burn it in the fireplace. It wouldn't catch fire. Even when I poured my remaining fuel gel onto it, the flames curled away. The wood blackened slightly, then hissed like it was alive, rejecting the fire. The carved symbols seemed to writhe in the heat, pulsing with their own internal light. But when I tried to burn the contract, something else happened. The paper caught immediately, but instead of turning to ash, it reformed. The flames spelled out words in the air. A promise is a promise, William. That was when the window frosted over, forming a handprint. 5 fingers. Wide palm, but too long, too thin. The kind of hand you'd get if you stretched human fingers until they broke. And then another handprint appeared. And another. Soon the entire window was covered with them, all pressing from the outside, all trying to get in. I grabbed my revolver and shouted, "Get away!" The trees didn't move. But then the glass reflected something that wasn't me. Something crouched behind me, in the reflection, inches from my shoulder. It looked like the man I'd seen in the woods, but wrong in every possible way. The face was human, but the proportions were off. Eyes too far apart. Mouth too wide. Skin that looked like it had been sewn together from different pieces. I turned, swinging. Nothing. But the smell that hit me, rotting bark, moldy earth, something wet and decaying. And underneath it all, the sweet smell of children's candy. Gummy bears and lollipops. The kind of smell designed to lure kids closer. And the floor beneath me? It pulsed. Just once. Like something enormous had just shifted in its sleep. I ran outside into the snow, barely clothed, no boots. I sprinted barefoot across ice, lungs burning. But as I ran, I could hear them behind me. Not chasing, following, like they knew exactly where I was going. When I looked back at Station Echo, it was glowing faintly, blue-green, like something had opened a door between worlds. But here's the worst part. There were children standing in the trees. 4 of them, barefoot, motionless, watching, and they all looked wrong. Their faces too symmetrical. Their mouths stitched in permanent, too wide grins, like dolls made from memory. One of them wore the same coat I did. Same ranger insignia. Same everything. It waved at me, and its voice was mine. "Come back inside, Will. You forgot the rest." That's when I saw the other boxes. Scattered throughout the forest floor, barely visible under decades of fallen leaves. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. All connected by thin lines of disturbed earth, like the root system of some massive underground organism. And I understood. Station Echo wasn't just a building. It was a lid. A cap on something that had been growing beneath black pines for decades. Every child who'd made a promise had fed it. Every adult who'd returned had strengthened it. And now it was ready to emerge. The children in the trees stepped forward in unison. Their too wide grins never wavered. "Time to keep your promise, Will," they said in harmony. "Time to let us all up." Behind them, more figures emerged from the darkness. Adults this time. Rangers. Hikers. All the missing people from the past 30 years. All with the same stitched smile. All with the same desperate hunger in their eyes. At the front of the group stood a woman in a ranger uniform. Her name tag read as Walsh. She beckoned to me with fingers that bent in too many places. "Don't fight it, Will," she said. "Fighting just makes it hurt more." I fought for 3 days before I understood. Before I accepted my purpose. What purpose? I managed to ask. To feed the congregation below. To help them grow strong enough to rise. To honor the promises we made when we were young and stupid and afraid. She gestured to the boxes scattered through the forest. Each box contains one of us. One promise. One soul freely given in childhood innocence. But they need a ranger, someone with authority, with keys, with access to open the final seal. What final seal? Susan smiled, and her face cracked like old leather. The one under the whole damn forest, Will. The big one. The box that holds the thing we've all been feeding. That's when I heard it. A sound like breathing, but massive, coming from everywhere at once. The entire forest floor rose and fell gently, as if I were standing on the chest of something sleeping, something that was starting to wake up. I don't remember much of what happened next. Only pieces. I stumbled for miles, delirious, half-frozen, with that photo of myself as a child clenched in my hand. But every direction I ran led me back to Station Echo. The forest itself seemed to bend around me, folding space until escape became impossible. I remembered now. I've been here before. When I was 6, my parents had camped near this ridge. I wandered off, got lost. But I hadn't just wandered. I'd been called by whispers in the wind, by promises of friendship, by voices that knew exactly what a scared, lonely child needed to hear. I was gone for 2 nights. When they found me, I couldn't explain where I'd been. I just kept saying, the Whisper Man told me stories under the floor. My parents assumed I'd fallen and hit my head. The doctors found no signs of injury, no evidence of trauma. Just a child with selective amnesia and an overactive imagination. But what I'd actually done was make a deal. I'd given something permission to stay with me. A guide, it had said. Forest friend. Promise. Let me in now, and I'll keep you safe. And when you're older, when you're stronger, you'll come back and help me help others. It had seemed so reasonable at the time. So harmless. It lived in me for years. Quiet. Dormant. A whisper in the back of my mind that guided my choices. Made me want to become a ranger. Made me specialize in wilderness rescue. Made me volunteer for dangerous assignments where I might find other lost children. Other children who needed a forest friend. Until I returned. Until I stood over the exact spot where I'd first invited it in. And now it wanted to finish what it started. But as I stumbled through the forest, more memories surfaced. Not just of my own experience, but of others. The congregation below wasn't just one entity, it was a collection. A hive mind made up of every promise, every deal, every childhood fear that had been fed to it over the decades. And I was its crown jewel. The first child to give it true strength. The first to willingly invite it in rather than just making a desperate bargain. I saw flashes of the other children. Tommy crying in these same woods while something wearing his father's face coaxed him to just move a little dirt. Sarah lost and scared, making friends with a nice lady who lived in the holes. David, so lonely after his parents' divorce that he'd agree to anything for companionship. All of them groomed. All of them cultivated. All of them eventually called back to honor their promises. But I was different. I was the seed, the first infection, the one who'd let it in willingly, completely, without reservation. And that made me its key to everything else. As dawn broke over the forest, I found myself back at Station Echo. But it looked different now. Older. The walls were covered with children's drawings, stick figures holding hands with tall shadow people. Hearts and smiley faces decorating the edges. My drawing. From when I was 6. I decorated my prison before I'd even understood what it was. Inside, the boxes were all open now. Empty. Their contents released. The congregation below had grown strong enough to manifest, to take physical form. And they were waiting for me. Welcome home, Will, said a voice that was every voice I'd ever trusted. My mother. My father. My first grade teacher. The camp counselor who taught me to tie knots. You've done so well. Grown so strong. Learned so much about the woods and the people who get lost in them. I turned to find myself facing a figure that was everyone and no one. It shifted constantly, cycling through faces I recognized and loved. But the eyes remained the same, ancient, patient, hungry. You brought us so many new friends over the years. Every lost hiker you found, every scared child you rescued, every person who trusted you completely. I thought of all the rescues I performed, all the people I'd found in the wilderness, all the grateful families who'd thanked me for bringing their loved ones home safely. How many of them had I infected? How many had made promises of their own after I'd found them? How many were walking around with whispers in their heads, waiting for their own call to return? But now it's time for the final step, the figure continued. Time to open in the last seal. Time to let us rise. It gestured to the floor, where the dark stain had grown to cover the entire room. The wood was soft now, rotting from the inside out, and underneath I could see lights. Thousands of them. Each one a soul, a promise, a key waiting to be turned. All you have to do is step down. Join us completely. Let us finish becoming you. I looked around the room one last time, at the children's drawings on the walls, at the boxes I'd helped fill over the years, at the evidence of my life's work, not as a rescuer, but as a recruiter. And I understood my choice. I could resist, fight, try to escape, die as myself, or I could embrace what I'd always been and help them rise. Either way, the congregation below would eventually find another key, another ranger, another scared child to groom and cultivate. But if I joined them willingly, I could make sure they were merciful. On day 7, I stopped trying to call for help. I built a fire. I unpacked my gear again. I opened the box and set the photo beside my sleeping bag. I felt a calm, like I belonged. But it wasn't the calm of acceptance. It was the calm of understanding, of finally seeing the complete picture. The congregation below wasn't evil. Not really. It was just hungry. It had been trapped under the forest for so long that it had forgotten what it meant to exist in the light. It needed guides, teachers, people who understood both worlds. And I could be that bridge. When I looked in the mirror that night, my face looked older. Not aged, like something had worn it for a long time. But I could also see deeper now, into the spaces between thoughts, into the quiet places where the whispers lived. I saw them all there, every person I'd ever rescued, every child I'd ever found. They weren't gone. They were part of something larger now, something that had room for everyone. And then the door creaked open. I didn't lock it. The figure stood there. Same coat, same voice, but now I could see it clearly. It wasn't wearing my face. It was my face, the part of me that had always belonged to the forest, the part that had never really left. Will, it's your turn. I asked what it wanted. It didn't speak. It just tilted its head, and I remembered the others, the ones I saw in the trees. Other children, other deals, but also something else. Other rangers, other adults who'd chosen to help rather than fight. They'd never left the forest. Not really. But they weren't prisoners. They were gardeners. The figure stepped forward, and instead of merging into me, it stepped aside, revealing what was really behind the door. Chris, Leland, Jules, Trish, my team, my friends. They stood in the doorway, their faces peaceful but concerned, their eyes clear and aware. Will, Chris said, we've been looking for you, man. The storm cleared 2 days ago. I stared at them in shock. They looked normal. Completely normal. No stitched grins. No wrong proportions. No ancient hunger in their eyes. How long have I been here? I asked. For days, Jules replied. Your GPS tracker showed you stationary, but we couldn't get through until the weather broke. Trish stepped forward, her medical kit in hand. You look dehydrated. Maybe hypothermic. Let's get you checked out. I looked around the room. The boxes were gone. The dark stain on the floor was just old water damage. The children's drawings were just shadows cast by my dying fire. Did anyone else? See what? Leland asked gently. Well, you've been alone for 4 days. It's normal to experience some disorientation, but as they helped me gather my gear, I noticed things. Small things. The way Chris's shadow fell at the wrong angle. How Jules's radio crackled with voices, even when it was turned off. The fact that Trish's breath didn't fog in the cold air. And when I looked in the mirror one last time, I saw all of us there. But behind our reflections, dozens of other faces looked back. Rangers and hikers and children, all watching with patient, understanding eyes. The congregation below hadn't taken my team. They'd recruited them. Just like they'd recruited me 19 years ago. Just like they recruited everyone who stayed too long in their domain. And now we were all going home together. Back to the world. Back to our jobs and our lives and our responsibilities. Back to finding more lost children who needed help. Because that's what we did. That's what we'd always done. We found people in the woods and brought them home. The only difference now was that we understood what home really meant. The chopper found us the next morning. All 5 of us standing around the remnants of my fire. A perfect rescue. A happy ending. Leland spotted smoke from above. They landed in a clearing nearby. I greeted them with a smile. Said all the right things. Explained the miscommunication. Claimed the storm messed with my signal. Claimed I stayed calm, rationed my food, followed protocol. They believed me. Chris backed up my story. Jules confirmed radio difficulties. Trish documented my good health. Leland noted the condition of the shelter. We were a team again. A unit. All on the same page. But the pilot squinted at us and muttered, "You all look different somehow." I just laughed. 4 days in the woods will do that to you. We flew back. Debriefed. Wrote reports. Nobody questioned us again. But I noticed things during the debrief. How Chris answered questions before they were fully asked. How Jules's equipment readings were always exactly what headquarters wanted to hear. How Trish's medical assessments showed perfect health for everyone. How Leland knew exactly which plants had grown in areas he'd never visited. We were better at our jobs now. More intuitive. More connected to the forest and the people who got lost in it. Over the following weeks, our rescue success rate improved dramatically. We found lost hikers in record time, located missing children who'd been given up for dead, saved lives that should have been lost. The other rangers started calling us the miracle team. The press wrote articles about our uncanny ability to navigate impossible terrain and locate people against all odds. But I knew the truth. We weren't finding people faster because we were better at our jobs. We were finding them faster because they were calling to us. Every lost soul in Black Pines, every scared child, every desperate hiker, they all heard the whispers now. The same whispers that had called to me when I was 6. And they followed those whispers until they found us. Until we found them. And then we brought them home. To safety. To their families. To their normal lives. Most of them. The ones who were too afraid, too lonely, too desperate, we brought them somewhere else first. Somewhere they could make new friends. Somewhere they could promise to help others the way they've been helped. Somewhere they could leave a little box with their name on it. We were good at our jobs. We always had been. We just understood now that our job was bigger than we'd originally thought. It's been 4 months since Station Echo. Sometimes I still dream about it. The floor pulsing, the voice under the boards, the other children's faces smiling too wide. But mostly, I dream about the work we're doing now. Chris got promoted to regional coordinator. He has access to missing persons reports from 6 states now. Jules upgraded our communication systems. We can hear distress calls from frequencies that don't officially exist. Trish expanded her medical training to include psychological counseling. She's very good at helping people process traumatic experiences. And Leland? He's mapping the old forests. All of them. Every place where the boundary between worlds grows thin. As for me, I've become something of a legend in search and rescue. They call me the Child Whisperer because I have an uncanny ability to connect with lost kids, to make them trust me, to help them feel safe. I know exactly what to say to a scared 6-year-old hiding in the woods. I know how to make them believe that everything will be okay if they just come with me. I know how to promise them friends who will never leave them alone again. And I always keep my promises. The forest is growing. Not just black pines, but others. Places where children disappear for a few days and come back changed. Places where adult rescuers volunteer for assignments they should be afraid of. Places where the missing persons reports have a strange pattern. They're all found safely, but they're never quite the same. I think it wants to borrow me again. More often now. Sometimes I'll be in the middle of a rescue and realize I've been walking for hours with no memory of the route. I'll find myself in parts of the forest that aren't on any map, with a frightened child who trusts me completely. And I'll help them make new friends. That forest is old. Older than the station. Older than the names we gave it. But it's not confined to black pines anymore. It's spreading, growing, reaching out through every person who's ever made a promise in the dark. Through every rescue worker who's stayed too long in the woods. Through every child who's learned to trust the whispers. Something lives in it. Something that started small and hungry and has grown patient and wise. It doesn't need to force anyone anymore. It doesn't need to trap or threaten or deceive. It just needs to help. To offer friendship to the lonely. To provide safety to the scared. To give purpose to those who feel lost. And once you accept that help, once you understand the true scope of what you're part of, you never want to leave. It borrowed me. And now, some nights, I feel it knocking inside my bones. But it's not trying to get out anymore. It's trying to show me more. More lost children. More ways to help. More promises that need to be kept. I've learned to listen to those whispers. To follow them through forests I've never seen before. To trust the congregation below when they guide me to someone who needs rescue. Because that's what we do. We rescue people. We bring them home. Sometimes their original home. Sometimes their new one. And this time, I know I won't come back. Not as the Will who entered Station Echo 4 months ago, but as something better. Something that can help more people. Something that understands what the lost really need. I'm writing this down because someone should know. Someone should understand that when we disappear into the woods, rangers, hikers, children, we don't always die. Sometimes we just expand, become part of something larger. Something that has room for everyone who's ever felt alone in the dark. So if you ever find yourself alone in the woods and you hear a whisper under your tent floor, and a friendly voice offers to help you find your way home. Listen carefully to what kind of help they're offering. And remember that there are many different kinds of home. Because once it knows your name, it never forgets. But maybe that's not always a bad thing. Maybe some promises are worth keeping. Even the ones you made when you were too young to understand what you were really agreeing to. The congregation is always looking for new members. New friends, new family, and we're very, very good at helping people feel welcome. So don't be afraid if you hear us calling. We only want to help. We only want to bring you home. All of you. Every last one. They call it the Disappearance Trail. No official name. No ranger log will admit it exists. But ask the old-timers, they'll go pale before changing the subject. Their eyes will dart to the tree lean, and they'll mutter something about places that shouldn't be walked alone. 8 people have vanished along its loop in the last 40 years. No bodies. No signs of struggle, just dropped gear, sometimes still warm. Like the person was peeled out of reality while mid-step, mid-breath, mid-thought. I know this because I was assigned to clear trail markers near it. And because I found something I shouldn't have, a video camera wrapped in a shredded raincoat, half buried beneath pine needles that were still green despite the camera being there for God knows how long. The footage was wrong. The date was wrong. The people on it didn't match any of our known missing. Their clothes were off, not undressed, but chronologically off, like costume pieces from different decades stitched together. One spoke a language I couldn't place, harsh consonants that seemed to scrape against a microphone. And at the very end, just before the static consumed everything, I saw my own face, standing behind them in the frame like I'd always been there, smiling that easy ranger smile I give to lost tourists. Problem is, I'd never seen that video before in my life, never met those people, never stood in that place that looked like Briar Loop but felt fundamentally wrong, like a photograph taken in a funhouse mirror. That was 2 days ago, and now something is following me. It doesn't move when I watch it. I can feel its presence at the edge of my vision, patient as stone. It doesn't breathe, but when I blink, it's closer, always closer. The distance between us shrinking like a noose tightening. The worst part? Sometimes I catch myself looking for it, expecting it. Like part of me wants to turn around and finally see what's been hunting me through these endless trees. And here's the real nightmare. I'm writing this in a ranger station that doesn't exist on any map. The building has weight, substance, the smell of coffee and old wood. But it wasn't here yesterday. I've walked this section of forest 100 times, memorized every deadfall and deer path. I think I stepped off the trail somewhere between sleeping and waking. And I think it let me in. The walls here are covered with photos, groups of hikers, smiling families, solo backpackers giving thumbs up to the camera. All strangers. But in the corner of each photo, barely visible, is the same figure. Watching. Waiting. It has my face. If you ever hike through Briar Loop Trail and see a narrow, unmarked fork with no signpost, don't take it. If you do, don't speak. Don't acknowledge what you see. Because if you acknowledge it, it remembers you. And once it remembers, it starts collecting. My name is Alex Granger. I've worked backcountry patrol with the Forestry Service for 11 years. I've bushwhacked through fire scars that turned the sky orange and made the air taste like ash. I've weathered snowstorms that buried trail markers 10 feet deep, navigated rock slides that rewrote entire mountainsides overnight. Nothing scares me. Nothing used to. Until I was assigned to Briar Loop. It's a 22-mile round trail buried in the lesser-traveled western boundary of Black Ridge National Forest. Beautiful, uneventful on paper. The kind of assignment that sounds like a vacation, no technical climbing, no bear activity reports, few hikers to worry about. A routine maintenance sweep through old-growth pine and Douglas fir, checking trail conditions after the recent windstorms. Except, there's something people don't talk about. Not officially. It has a reputation. Quite unofficial. The kind of thing you only hear after a few beers at the base camp lodge, when the old-timers start swapping stories they pretend are jokes. Rangers who've been here since the Carter administration will suddenly go quiet when Briar Loop comes up in conversation. They'll find excuses to reassign newer staff to other sectors. They call it the disappearance trail. Hikers who vanish without explanation. Rangers who go looking for them and don't come back. Or if they do, they quit within the month, citing family emergencies or career changes. Always urgent. Always final. No forwarding addresses. Sarah Martinez lasted 3 weeks after her sweep of the western boundary. Transferred to fire suppression in Montana. Jim Hendricks made it 2 days before requesting immediate reassignment to desk duty. Said the forest felt wrong. Said the trees were listening. Management dismisses it as coincidence. Stress. The isolation getting to people. They point to statistics. Black Ridge has one of the lowest incident rates in the Pacific Northwest. Officially, nothing unusual ever happens here. But the old-timers know better. It's nonsense, right? I thought so too. I'm a rational person. I believe in GPS coordinates and topographical maps and the scientific method. I've never seen a ghost, never felt the supernatural brush against my shoulder on a dark trail. Until the footage. I was 3 days into a solo sweep, cleaning up trail signage damaged by wind and mapping fallen debris for the maintenance crews. Standard procedure. My GPS showed me as dead on the Briar Loop main trail, following waypoints I'd saved from previous visits. But something was off. The terrain felt unfamiliar. Trees were tighter, pressing in from both sides like curious onlookers. The canopy was thicker, blocking out more sun than it should have. The air hung still and heavy, without even the whisper of breeze that usually flows through these mountains. No birds called. No insects buzzed. Even the sound of my own footsteps seemed muffled, absorbed by the forest floor as if the earth were drinking them up. I chalked it up to wind damage shifting familiar landmarks. Storms can dramatically alter a landscape. What looks like solid trail markers one season can be buried under deadfall the next. I'd seen it before. But my compass was acting strange. The needle would point north for a few minutes, then slowly drift east, then suddenly snap back as if correcting itself. My GPS coordinates flickered occasionally, showing impossible readings, coordinates that would place me miles from where I knew I was standing. I should have turned back then. Instead, I kept walking. That's when I found the camera. It was wedged under a massive deadfall, a Douglas fir that must have been 200 years old before the storm brought it down. The trunk was easily 6 feet in diameter, its root system creating a cave-like overhang where small animals might shelter. But there were no animal signs. No scat, no tracks, no worn paths indicating regular use. Just the camera, surrounded by shredded cloth and splintered plastic, like someone had been wearing or carrying other gear that had been processed, chewed up by something with methodical precision. The fabric looked expensive, Gore-Tex or similar high-end outdoor gear, but it had been reduced to confetti-sized pieces that sparkled slightly in the filtered sunlight. The weird thing was the camera's condition. Despite being surrounded by destruction, it was perfectly intact. Not even dirty. The brand was old, a digital camcorder from the early 2000s, the kind of the flip-out LCD screen and mini-DV tapes. Heavy, bulky, obsolete technology that most people had abandoned years ago. But it looked brand new. I almost left it there. Protocol says you don't disturb potential evidence, and something about the scene felt like evidence of something. But curiosity won. I've always been too curious for my own good. I didn't think much of it until I got back to my tent that night and reviewed the tape. That's when things got surreal. The first thing I noticed was how clear the footage was. Too clear. Modern digital cameras don't capture that level of detail, and this was definitely not modern equipment. Every pine needle stood out in sharp relief. Every shadow had depth and texture that seemed to extend beyond the screen. And the sound quality was wrong, too. I could hear things that shouldn't have been audible, individual leaves rustling, the photographer's heartbeat, whispered conversations that seemed to be happening just outside the frame. It was like watching the world through supernatural senses. The video was grainy in all the wrong ways, not the comforting static of old technology, but interference that seemed intentional, deliberate. The timestamp read August 14, 2003, burned into the corner of the frame in that distinctive early digital font. But the hikers weren't dressed for 2003. Their clothes were older. Much older. The man in the foreground wore a thick wool sweater that looked hand-knitted, the kind of thing you'd see in photographs from the 1970s. His boots were leather hiking boots with metal eyelets, good quality, but a style that went out of fashion decades ago. A Walkman was clipped to his belt, the headphone cord snaking up to cheap foam earbuds. The woman holding the camera spoke in broken English, her accent thick and unfamiliar. Sometimes she'd switch to another language entirely, harsh guttural sounds that didn't match any European language I recognized. Maybe Finnish, like I'd first thought, but with an edge to it that made my teeth ache. "Trail is good here," she said to the camera, panning across what should have been familiar forest. "Very good for walking. Trees are, how you say, listening." "Yes, listening trees." She laughed, but there was no joy in it. But here's what really got me. What made my blood run cold in that tent at 11 p.m. with nothing but canvas between me and the same forest. They weren't on Briarloop. I know that trail. Intimately. I've mapped it a dozen times, photographed every significant landmark, memorized every twist and elevation change. I could walk it blindfolded and tell you exactly where I was just by the sound of my footsteps on different soil compositions. What I saw on that footage was not anywhere I recognized, even though they clearly believed they were on a marked trail. The woman kept referring to Briar Trail and pointing to signs that should have been familiar. But the signs were wrong. The text was in that same harsh language she occasionally spoke, with English translations underneath that didn't quite make sense. Trail fork, choose wisely, read one sign, but the grammar was off, like it had been translated by someone who didn't quite understand the language. And the landmarks were impossible. They passed a fallen statue that looked Roman, a marble bust of some emperor or god, half buried in vines and moss like it had been there for centuries. The features were worn smooth by weather, but you could still make out the suggestion of a stern face, eyes that seemed to track the camera as it passed. There are no Roman artifacts in the Pacific Northwest. None. The indigenous peoples of this region had rich, complex cultures, but they didn't build marble statues. And European settlers didn't arrive until the mid-1800s, long after the Roman Empire had crumbled to dust. But there it was, solid as bedrock. 20 minutes into the footage, they encountered something even more impossible, a concrete stairwell spiraling down into the earth, right in the middle of dense forest. The stairs were modern, poured concrete with metal railings, the kind you'd find in an urban subway system. But they descended into darkness between two massive cedar trees that had clearly been growing there for centuries. The woman filmed the stairwell for a long time, occasionally zooming in on details that made no sense. There were numbers stenciled on the concrete floor markers, like in a parking garage. B1, B2, B3, continuing down beyond the reach of daylight. "Very deep," she whispered to the camera. "Very deep stairs. Goes down to the listening place." The man with the Walkman approached the stairwell, cautiously. His voice was clearer now, and I realized he was speaking English, but with the same strange accent as the woman. "We should not," he said. "The ranger, he said not to go down." "What ranger?" "There were no rangers assigned to this area in 2003. I checked the logs. But the trail goes down," the woman insisted. "See? The markers." She panned the camera, and sure enough, there were trail blazes leading down the stairwell. Official-looking blazes in Forest Service colors. But they were wrong, too. The wrong shape, the wrong placement, like someone had studied our marking system but misunderstood the details. They didn't go down the stairs. Instead, they continued along what they call the trail, but which looked more and more like no trail I'd ever seen. The forest grew thicker, darker. The trees were wrong, species that don't grow in this climate, arranged in patterns that hurt to look at. And then, just before the footage cuts to static, the camera pans up during what seems like a casual conversation about where to set up camp. And you can see me standing behind them. Not someone who looks like me. Me, wearing my current ranger coat, the same one hanging in my tent as I watched the footage. My badge number clearly visible. My radio clipped to my shoulder, the same model I'd been issued just 2 months earlier. I was smiling that easy ranger smile, the one I've practiced in the mirror for dealing with difficult hikers. But my eyes were wrong. Empty, like someone else was wearing my face. But that's not possible. That coat didn't even exist in 2003. Hell, I wasn't even a ranger in 2003. I was in college, studying forestry management and dreaming about working in the wilderness. I didn't join the Forest Service until 2009. I don't remember filming it. I don't remember meeting them. I don't remember being in that impossible forest with its Roman statues and underground stairwells and listening trees. But I swear to you, it was me. The footage ends abruptly, dissolving into static that seemed to move with purpose, forming patterns that almost looked like faces or maps or warnings written in a language I couldn't read. And something in my gut whispered with absolute certainty, that wasn't the past. It was a preview. The next morning, I packed up early. My hands shook as I rolled my sleeping bag, as I checked and double-checked my GPS coordinates. The rational part of my mind, the part trained in emergency protocols and evidence preservation, told me to hike straight out, report the camera to my supervisor, let someone else figure out what the hell I'd stumbled into. But the forest felt different now. Expectant. The morning light filtered through the canopy in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, creating shadows that moved independently of the wind. Every sound, the crack of a twig, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a jay, felt amplified and significant. My plan was simple. Follow the main trail back to the trailhead, maintain radio contact with base camp, stick to established protocols. No detours. No curiosity. Just get out and let someone else deal with impossible footage and the questions it raised. But when I reached mile marker 15, I saw something that stopped me cold. Fork in the trail. Not just any fork. A perfectly maintained secondary path branching off from the main briar loop. The kind of fork that should have had signage, should have been marked on every map, should have been part of my patrol briefing. No signpost. No log entry. No GPS marker. But the path was perfectly cleared, worn down smooth like it had been used for years, decades even. The trail blazes were fresh, the familiar blue diamond markers of the Forest Service gleaming like they'd been painted yesterday. But I knew this section of trail. I'd walked it dozens of times. There had never been a fork here. Never. I pulled out my GPS unit, checked the coordinates 3 times. According to the satellite data, I was standing on empty forest. No trail markers. No secondary paths. Just dense timber stretching for miles in every direction. But the path was there, solid and undeniable under my boots. I should have walked past it. Should have ignored the camera, ignored the footage, ignored the way my pulse quickened as I stared down that impossible trail. Should have reported everything and transferred to a nice rational desk job in fire prevention. But my curiosity, God, I wish I'd ignored it. The path seemed to beckon. Not literally. I'm not talking about supernatural compulsion or mysterious voices calling my name. It was subtler than that, more psychological. Like the feeling you get when you're standing at the edge of a cliff, that inexplicable urge to jump that psychologists call the call of the void. Except this wasn't self-destruction calling to me. It was completion. Like part of me had always known this path existed, had been waiting for me to find it. Like I'd been walking in circles my entire career, and this was finally the way forward. I took the fork. The trees changed immediately. Not gradually, not over the course of several hundred yards, immediately. One step, I was in familiar Pacific Northwest forest. The next, I was somewhere else entirely. Taller trees, much taller. Douglas firs that stretched up beyond my line of sight, their trunks massive enough that 5 people holding hands couldn't circle them. The bark was wrong too, black instead of the familiar reddish-brown, with patterns carved into the surface that looked almost like writing. Less underbrush. The forest floor was clear, carpeted with pine needles that felt soft and springy under my boots. But the needles were the wrong color, not brown or gold, but deep red, like dried blood. And they made no sound when I walked on them, absorbing my footsteps completely. The deeper I walked, the quieter it got. Not peaceful quiet, predator quiet. The kind of silence that means something is watching, waiting, deciding whether you're prey or threat. My radio began emitting a low, constant hum, like it was trying to lock onto a signal that didn't quite exist. The sound was rhythmic, almost hypnotic, almost like breathing. After 20 minutes of walking, though my watch seemed to be running slow, the minute hand moving in stutters and jerks, I found the first marker. A wooden stake driven deep into the earth, so old the wood had gone gray and split with age. Carved into the surface was a symbol that looked like a handprint, but wrong. Too many fingers. Fingers that were too long, with joints in places where joints shouldn't be. The symbol had been painted over with something red and thick that I tried very hard not to think about. A piece of paper was nailed below the carving, but it wasn't paper exactly. More like birch bark, thin and flexible, with words burned into the surface rather than written. It read, in careful block letters, "If you're reading this, it's too late to go back." I laughed. Actually laughed out loud, the sound echoing strangely in the too quiet forest. It was such a cliché, such a perfect horror movie line that it broke the spell of creeping dread that had been building since I'd taken the fork. Just some elaborate prank. Had to be. One of the other rangers, maybe, or local teenagers trying to scare hikers. The kind of thing that would make a great story back at base camp. I turn around to head back, still chuckling at my own gullibility. The trail behind me was gone. Not overgrown. Not blocked by fallen trees or rock slides. Gone. Where there should have been a clear path back to the main trail, there was only dense forest. Ancient trees growing so close together that their branches intertwined, creating an impenetrable wall of bark and needle. I pushed through what looked like the most likely gap, branches scratching at my face and jacket. But after 10 yards of fighting through undergrowth that seemed to grow thicker with each step, I merged into a small clearing that definitely hadn't been there before. My GPS was frozen, displaying the same coordinates it had shown 20 minutes ago. My compass spun lazily in circles, the needle unable to find magnetic north. The radio hum had grown louder, more insistent, and underneath it I thought I could hear voices. Distant conversations in that same harsh language from the video. That's when panic really set in. Not the manageable concern of being temporarily lost, but the deep primal terror of realizing you're in serious trouble. The kind of fear that makes your vision tunnel and your hands shake and your training seem suddenly inadequate. I tried to retrace my steps, but every direction looked the same now. Identical trees, identical undergrowth, identical red needle carpet stretching in all directions. It was like being lost in a maze made of forest. But then, ahead through the fog that had started rolling in despite the clear morning I'd started with, I saw salvation. A rooftop. A ranger station. What the hell? It shouldn't have been there. Not just because it wasn't on any of our maps, though that was troubling enough, but because I knew this area. I'd studied every structure, every fire road, every maintenance building in the Black Ridge District. There were no ranger stations in the western boundary. The nearest outpost was 40 miles south, and it was just equipment shed and communication relay. But it stood there, solid and undeniable. A proper ranger station, the kind they built in the 1960s when the Forest Service had bigger budgets and grander ambitions. Wooden shingles weathered to a silver gray that matched the bark of the impossible trees surrounding it. Solar panels on the roof, modern ones, the kind installed within the last 5 years. Glass windows intact, no cracks or chips despite being in the middle of nowhere. And a carved placard above the door, letters burned deep into a piece of cedar. Station Orion. EST 1969. Orion. I never heard of a Station Orion. Not in Black Ridge, not in any of the Pacific Northwest forests. I'd memorized the registry of every official outpost from Canada to California during my training. There had never been a Station Orion. But the building breathed with familiarity. The proportions were right, the architectural details matching dozens of other Forest Service structures I'd worked in over the years. Even the paint scheme was correct, that distinctive green and brown that had been standard issue for decades. It looked like it belonged here, like it had always been here, like I had somehow forgotten it existed. I approached cautiously, my hand instinctively moving to the radio clipped to my shoulder. But the device was still emitting that rhythmic hum, and I realized that even if I could get a signal, what would I report? That I'd found a building that shouldn't exist? That I was lost on a trail that didn't appear on any map? They'd send a search team. Good people who didn't deserve to walk into whatever this was. The front door was unlocked. Of course it was. I stepped inside. The interior was wrong in the most unsettling way possible. It was exactly right. Dustless, warm, lived-in, like someone had just stepped out for a moment and would be back any minute. The layout was standard Forest Service. A main room with a desk, filing cabinets, maps on the walls. A small kitchen area with a coffee pot that was still warm, the red light glowing to indicate fresh brew. A communication station with a radio more advanced than anything I'd ever seen, its display showing frequencies and signal patterns that looked more like sonar than standard Ranger communication. Papers were stacked neatly on the desk. Incident reports, maintenance logs, weather observations, all filled out in careful handwriting, all dated within the last few months. But the locations referenced didn't match any places I knew, and the incident descriptions were odd. Hiker reported seeing Roman architecture at mile marker 7. Advised to ignore unusual landmarks. Trail maintenance crew found additional stairwell access points. Sealed per protocol. Time distortion event lasted 3.7 hours. No civilian witnesses. I found a journal on the table, leather-bound and thick. The kind of field notebook rangers used before everything went digital. The entries spanned decades, starting from the station's establishment in 1969 and continuing right up to the present day. Different handwriting, different pens, but consistent in their meticulous detail. The early entries read like standard ranger logs. June 15, 1969, station operational. Initial survey of western boundary complete. No significant hazards identified. July 2, 1969, first unusual report from civilian hikers. Claims of impossible architecture dismissed as altitude sickness. August 14, 1969, pattern emerging. Western Boundary Trail system appears to be unstable. Recommend further investigation. But as the years progressed, the entries became stranger. March 3, 1973, trail reconfiguration event. Path to Briar Loop now requires specific entry protocols. Updated orientation materials accordingly. November 22, 1978, temporal displacement confirmed. Hiker emerged from 3-day circuit claiming only 2 hours had passed. Medical examination showed no signs of dehydration or exposure. May 17, 1983, communication with parallel stations established. Exchange protocols now in effect. Parallel stations. What the hell did that mean? I flipped through years of increasingly cryptic entries, each one raising more questions. References to loop maintenance, timeline stability, civilian containment protocols. Like the writers were dealing with problems that shouldn't exist, using procedures that made no sense. And then I reached the final page. The handwriting was different here. Shakier. More urgent. The ink looked fresh, like it had been written moments before I arrived. It's not a trail. It's a loop in time. A closed circuit that reality got stuck in, spinning the same story over and over with slight variations. It doesn't let you leave unless you take someone else's place. Someone has to maintain the loop, keep it stable, make sure it doesn't spread to the main timeline. I've been here for 28 years, watching, waiting, guiding the lost ones to their proper places in the pattern. But I'm tired now. Tired of being the constant in an equation that never resolves. If anyone finds this, I'm sorry. I tried to break it. I tried to warn people away. But the loop needs a ranger. It needs someone who understands the forest, who can work within the system instead of fighting it. The next one who walks in becomes the new constant. That's how it works. That's how it's always worked. The last page was signed with a name that made my knees buckle. Ranger Alex Granger. My name. My handwriting. The paper was still wet with ink. I dropped the journal and stumbled backward, my vision swimming. The room seemed to tilt around me, walls breathing in and out like lungs. The familiar smell of coffee and old wood became overwhelming, suffocating. How could that be me? How could I have been here since 1969 when I was born in 1987? When I'd only started working for the Forest Service 6 years ago. Almost. Unless time really was broken here. Unless the loop had been running for decades, cycling through variations of the same story, and I was just the latest iteration of a pattern that had been repeating since the station was established. Suddenly, the radio in a corner crackled to life. Static cleared, revealing a voice that made my blood freeze. It was my own voice. Orion Base to Loop Watch Status Report. My voice speaking through the static with professional calm. Like this was routine. Like I've been doing this for years. I stare at the radio paralyzed. The voice came again, more insistent. Orion Base to Loop Watch. Please respond. I lifted the microphone with shaking hands. I don't know why I responded. Instinct, maybe, or some deeper compulsion I didn't understand. This is Ranger Granger. I'm at Orion. What the hell is going on? Silence. Static. Then a reply, but it wasn't my voice this time. The trail doesn't like broken loops. The voice was older, weary. Still familiar, but changed by time and responsibility. Someone must replace the missing link. Keep the pattern stable. Keep the timeline from fragmenting. I don't understand, I whispered into the microphone. You walked in, the voice continued. You found the fork that shouldn't be there. You followed the path that exists between moments. Now you have to become what left. What left? What are you talking about? But before the voice could answer, I heard something that made me drop the microphone. Knocking. Loud, insistent knocking from somewhere inside the station. Not the front door. I would have seen someone approach. The basement. I didn't even know the place had a basement. But there it was, a trapdoor in the floor behind the desk, wooden planks fitted so perfectly I hadn't noticed them before. And as I watched, the trapdoor creaked open by itself, revealing stairs that descended into darkness. The knocking came again. 3 sharp raps, like someone politely requesting entry. From below. I descended the steps on legs that felt like water, my flashlight beam dancing wildly as my hands shook. Each step creaked under my weight, the sound echoing in the space below with unnatural resonance. The air grew colder as I went deeper, carrying a metallic taste that coated my tongue and made my fillings ache. This wasn't right. The station couldn't have a basement. I'd seen the foundation from outside, a simple concrete pad that elevated the structure maybe 2 feet off the ground. But here I was, going down stairs that had no business existing, into a space that geometry said was impossible. At the bottom, my flashlight revealed a corridor carved directly into stone. Native bedrock, smooth and dark, the kind you might find in a cave system. But this was clearly artificial, too straight, too purposeful. The walls were marked with symbols similar to the handprint I'd seen on the trail marker, but more elaborate, more conversational, like a written language that had evolved over centuries of use. The corridor curved gently to the right, following what felt like the natural contours of the earth. LED strips had been installed along the baseboards, providing dim but steady light that made my flashlight redundant. The technology was modern, professional grade, the kind of installation that would have required permits and electrical surveys and safety inspections, none of which should have been possible in a basement that didn't exist. After maybe 20 yards, the corridor opened into a small chamber that stopped me cold. It was furnished like a living space, a cot with military precision corners, Shelves lined with canned food and water containers, a small table with a camping chair. In the corner, a mirror hung from a nail driven into the stone wall. And sitting on the floor beside the cot, back against the wall, was a man who looked exactly like me. Older. Much older. His hair had gone completely gray, and he'd grown a beard that reached his chest. His ranger uniform was outdated, the style we'd used maybe 15 years ago, before the latest redesign. The fabric was faded but clean, maintained with the kind of obsessive care that comes from having nothing else to focus on. But those were my eyes, my jawline, my hands, though weathered and scarred by decades of outdoor work. He looked up slowly, and when he smiled, it was with my mouth but not my expression. This was a smile carved by years of patient resignation, of accepting truths too large and strange for normal comprehension. You took the fort, didn't you? His voice was mine too, but aged like whiskey. Deeper, rougher, worn smooth by countless conversations with empty air. I couldn't speak. My throat had closed up completely, and my vision was starting to tunnel at the edges. This was shock, I realized dimly. Psychological trauma manifesting as physical symptoms. I'd seen it in search and rescue situations before. I did too, he continued, studying me with eyes that held knowledge I wasn't sure I wanted. 40 years ago, though for me it feels like yesterday and forever at the same time. Time works differently down here. In the loop, I forced words out through my constricted throat. What is this place? He gestured around the chamber with one weathered hand. Home? Prison? Purgatory? Depends on your perspective and how long you've been here. I've tried all three viewpoints, and they're all accurate. This is impossible, I whispered. You can't be me. I'm me. I'm standing right here. He laughed, and the sound was bitter as burnt coffee. That's what I said when I met the one who came before me. He looked just like us, you know. Younger then, but the same face, the same confusion. He'd been here since 1969, when they first established the station. The one who came before? Alex Granger. Same name, same job, same curiosity that killed the cat. There have been dozens of us over the years, maybe hundreds. The loop recycles everything, including personnel. We're not the same person living through different timelines. We're different iterations of the same story, playing out with minor variations. I sank into the camping chair, my legs no longer capable of supporting my weight. That's insane. Is it more insane than finding a ranger station that doesn't exist? More insane than video footage of yourself doing things you never did? More insane than a trail that appears and disappears based on who's looking for it? He had a point. But accepting his explanation meant accepting that everything I understood about reality was fundamentally wrong. That cause and effect, linear time, individual identity, all of it was just a comfortable illusion that worked fine until you stumbled into places where the rules broke down. How do I get out? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. His smile turned sad. You don't. But maybe someone else can take your place. He leaned forward, and I could see the toll that decades of isolation had taken. Not just physical, though he looked like he'd aged hard, but something deeper. A fundamental exhaustion that went beyond tiredness into the realm of existential weariness. The loop needs a constant, he explained. Someone who understands the system, who can work within its parameters instead of fighting it. A ranger, basically. Someone trained to handle unusual situations and protect civilians from things they shouldn't encounter. But I tried to leave. I protested. I tried to break it. I spent years looking for exit points, weak spots in the pattern. I mapped every variation of the trail system, documented every anomaly, tried to warn people away. He gestured toward a stack of notebooks on the shelf beside his cot. Dozens of them, filled with what looked like decades of meticulous research. Maps drawn in careful detail, photographs taped to pages, observations written in cramped handwriting that grew smaller and more desperate over time. But the loop adapts, he continued. Every time I found a way to disrupt it, it evolved. New variables, new complications. It's not malicious, it's just trying to maintain stability. And stability requires someone who knows how to guide the lost ones to their proper places in the pattern. Lost ones, the hikers who take the fork. The ones who don't belong here but can't find their way back. They're not part of the original loop, so they create disruptions. Without proper guidance, they could destabilize the entire system, cause it to spread beyond the western boundary, contaminate the main timeline. I thought about the video footage, about the hikers speaking that strange language, about their impossible claims of being on Briarloop. What happens to them? They get recycled, fed back into the beginning of their story with their memories adjusted to fit the pattern. They hike the same trail, have the same conversations, make the same discoveries over and over. Most of them don't even realize they're stuck. That's horrible, is it? He tilted his head, considering. They're safe. They never experience fear or pain or loss. They get to have the same perfect hiking trip for eternity, complete with the joy of discovery and the satisfaction of conquest. From their perspective, they're living their best lives. But they're not real lives. They're recordings. What makes a life real? Novelty, suffering, the ability to make meaningful choices. He shrugged. Philosophers have been arguing about that question for millennia. I've had plenty of time to think about it, and I still don't have an answer. That's when I heard footsteps upstairs. Heavy boots on wooden floors, moving with purpose through the station above us. The older me, the original me, whatever he was, nodded grimly. Right on schedule. Who is it? Your replacement. The next iteration of the story. A young ranger, probably assigned to routine trail maintenance, who's going to find something he shouldn't have and get curious about things that are better left alone. I stood up so fast the chair toppled backward. I have to warn them. No. His voice was sharp, commanding. The voice of someone who'd held authority for decades and wasn't accustomed to being argued with. You can't. That's not how this works. I can't just let someone else walk into this trap. It's not a trap, he said patiently. It's a responsibility. Someone has to maintain the loop. Someone has to keep it stable. If you try to interfere, if you break the pattern, the consequences could be catastrophic. What consequences? Time doesn't like paradoxes. If the loop collapses, if all these recycled moments suddenly try to exist simultaneously in linear time, the backlash could tear holes in causality. Not just here, but spreading outward like ripples in a pond. Past events could unhappen. Future possibilities could collapse into impossibility. Reality itself could start coming apart at the seams. I stared at him, trying to process the magnitude of what he was describing. You're talking about the end of the world. I'm talking about the end of worlds. Plural. Every possible timeline, every alternate history, every might-have-been scenario, all of it could unravel if the loop loses containment. The footsteps upstairs grew louder, more urgent. I could hear someone moving around the station, opening drawers, examining papers, following the same pattern of discovery that had led me here. So what do? I asked. The older me smiled sadly. You become me. You take my place down here, maintain the stability protocols, guide the lost ones through their recycled stories. You learn to accept that some prisons are also sanctuaries, and some responsibilities are too important to abandon. For how long? Until the next iteration arrives. Could be months, could be decades. Time is fluid down here. You'll age, but slowly. You'll have plenty of opportunity to understand the system, to study the patterns, to make peace with your situation. And then you pass the responsibility to the next Alex Granger, just like I'm passing it to you. The loop continues, reality stays stable, and billions of people get to live their lives without ever knowing how close they came to non-existence. I wanted to refuse. Every instinct I had screamed against accepting this fate, against abandoning my life above ground for an eternity of custodial duty in a basement that shouldn't exist. But I could hear the logic in his words, feel the weight of cosmic responsibility settling on my shoulders like a lead blanket. And upstairs, someone was calling my name. The voice echoed from above, young and confident, touched with a kind of enthusiasm that only comes from loving your job. A voice I recognized. Hello? Anyone here? This is Ranger Reese with the Forest Service. Found some unusual equipment on the trail. Reese. Marcus Reese, one of the newest additions to our district. 26 years old, fresh out of training, eager to prove himself. I'd mentored him during his first few weeks, taught him trail protocols and safety procedures. Good kid. Smart, careful, dedicated to the mission. He deserved better than this. The older me was watching my face, reading the conflict there with the patience of someone who'd been through the same emotional turmoil decades ago. You know him. He's a rookie. Just started last month. He doesn't understand what he's walking into. Neither did you. Neither did I. That's how the pattern works. Curiosity leads to discovery. Discovery leads to involvement. Involvement leads to responsibility. It's elegant, really. Self-perpetuating. I started toward the stairs, but he moved to block my path. Despite his age, he was still strong, still had the wiry endurance that came from years of backcountry work. And he had something I didn't: absolute certainty about what needed to happen. You can't interfere, he said quietly. I know it's hard. I know every instinct you have is screaming at you to protect him. But if you try to break the pattern now, you'll make things worse for everyone. How could they be worse? He's about to lose his entire life and gain something else. Purpose, understanding, the knowledge that he's part of something larger than himself. There are worse fates. Upstairs, I could hear Reese moving around the station, his boots creaking on the wooden floors. He was thorough. I taught him to be thorough. He'd examine everything, just like I had. The papers on the desk, the communications equipment, the journal with its impossible entries. And eventually, he'd hear the knocking from below. Why does it have to be a ranger? I asked desperately. Why can't the loop maintain itself without human intervention? Because it's not just a temporal anomaly, the older me explained. It's a story, and stories need storytellers. They need someone who understands narrative structure, who can guide events toward meaningful conclusions rather than random chaos. That's insane, is it? Stories are how humans make sense of reality. They're how we organize cause and effect, how we find meaning in random events. The loop isn't just recycling time, it's recycling narrative. And narrative requires conscious guidance. I could hear Reese talking to himself upstairs, the way people do when they're trying to work through a puzzle. What the hell is this place? GPS says there's nothing here, but his voice faded as he moved to another part of the station. He'll find the journal soon, the older me said. He'll read about the temporal loops and the impossible architecture. He'll think it's some kind of elaborate prank or training exercise. Right up until he realizes the final entry was written by someone with his own name. His name, Marcus Reese. That's how it works. The loop doesn't just recycle events. It recycles identities. Every ranger who takes the fork, who follows the trail to its conclusion, becomes the next caretaker. But from the loop's perspective, they're all the same person. All variants of the same archetypal figure. My head was spinning. So you're not really Alex Granger. I am and I'm not. I have his memories, his personality, his training, and experience. But I'm also Marcus Reese and David Chin and Sarah Martinez and every other ranger who's taken this responsibility over the years. We're all facets of the same role, the same function within the larger pattern. The knocking started again, 3 sharp raps echoing up from the depths below us. Right on schedule. He's found the trapdoor, the older me said. In about 30 seconds, he's going to start down those stairs, just like you did. Just like I did 40 years ago. I won't let this happen. I pushed past him, heading for the stairs. But something strange occurred as I reached the first step. My legs felt heavy, like I was walking through thick mud. My vision began to blur at the edges, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I could feel a presence, not malicious, but implacable. The weight of the loop itself, pressing down on me, holding me in place. You can't fight it, the older me said gently. The pattern has momentum. Gravity. It pulls everything toward its proper conclusion. I tried to climb the stairs anyway, but each step became harder than the last. My body moved like I was underwater, every motion requiring enormous effort. By the third step, I couldn't lift my feet at all. This is how it begins, he continued. The moment you try to interfere with the natural flow of events, you become part of the system, a constant instead of a variable. The loop recognizes your importance and locks you into position. Below us, I could hear footsteps on the stone stairs. Careful, cautious footsteps belonging to someone who'd found something unexpected and was trying to make sense of it. Marcus, I called out, but my voice came out as barely a whisper. The loop was already editing me out of the active narrative, relegating me to background character status. He can't hear you, the older me said. You're becoming part of the infrastructure now. Necessary, but invisible. The foundation that supports the story rather than a participant in it. The footsteps grew closer. In moments, Marcus Reese would round the corner and see us standing there. Two versions of the same impossible story, one accepting his fate and the other fighting against inevitability. And then he would have to choose. Just like I had. Just like everyone who came before us. The loop continued, patient and eternal, recycling its stories and its storytellers with mechanical precision. And somewhere above us, in the world of linear time and rational causality, life went on without ever knowing how close it had come to unraveling completely. Marcus Reese appeared at the bottom of the stairs exactly as the pattern demanded, flashlight beams sweeping the chamber in careful arcs. He was younger than I remembered, or maybe I was just seeing him through eyes that had aged decades in the space of hours. He wore the same expression of professional curiosity mixed with growing unease that I'd felt exploring this impossible space. His light found the older me first, sitting calmly on his cot like this was the most natural thing in the world. Then the beam shifted to me, frozen halfway up the stairs, caught between two realities. Jesus Christ, Marcus breathed. Alex? What the hell are you doing down here? I tried to answer, but the words wouldn't come. The loop had me now, was reshaping my role from active participant to static element. I could feel my thoughts becoming sluggish, my memories of the surface world growing fuzzy around the edges. The older me stood up slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. Welcome to Station Orion, Ranger Reese. I know this is confusing, but I need you to stay calm and listen very carefully. Marcus took a step back, his hand instinctively moving toward the radio on his shoulder. But like mine had been, his radio was emitting only that rhythmic humming sound. Who are you? How do you know my name? I'm Alex Granger. I've been the caretaker here for 40 years, maintaining the stability of this temporal anomaly. And now it's time for me to pass that responsibility to someone else. That's impossible. Alex is right there. Marcus pointed at me with his flashlight. And you're not 40 years older than him. Time works differently here, the older me explained patiently. What you're experiencing isn't linear causality. It's narrative causality. Events happen because they serve the story, not because they follow physical laws. I watched Marcus process this, saw the same progression of emotions I'd experienced. Disbelief, confusion, the desperate attempt to find a rational explanation for irrational events. This is some kind of training exercise, he said finally. Psychological evaluation. See how I handle stress in impossible situations. I wish it were that simple. The older me gestured around the chamber. But training exercises don't usually involve carved stone chambers that exist in dimensional spaces that violate basic geometry. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his flashlight beam dancing between us as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. I wanted to warn him, to tell him to run, to somehow break free from the loop's influence long enough to save him from this fate. But I could barely think anymore. The pattern was asserting itself, writing me into its permanent structure. Soon I would be like the symbols carved into the stone walls, meaningful but static, part of the foundation rather than the active story. What happened to the real Alex Granger? Marcus asked. I am the real Alex Granger, the older me replied. Just as you are the real Marcus Reese. But we're also more than that. We're archetypal figures, the curious ranger, the responsible caretaker, the new arrival who must choose. The loop doesn't distinguish between individual identity and narrative function. Choose what? Whether to accept responsibility for something larger than yourself, or to let reality fragment into chaos. He gestured toward a shelf lined with notebooks. I've spent decades documenting this place, mapping its patterns, learning how to maintain the stability that keeps temporal paradoxes from spreading beyond this boundary. It's important work. Necessary work. And if I refuse, then the loop collapses. All the recycled time, all the repeated stories, all the carefully maintained narrative threads, they'll try to exist simultaneously in linear space. The paradoxes will cascade outward, unraveling causality itself. Marcus looked at me, frozen on the stairs. What happens to Alex? He becomes part of the infrastructure, a constant element that helps maintain system stability. He'll age slowly, retain his memories and personality, but he won't be an active participant anymore. He'll be more like a living reminder of what this place is and why it matters. I wanted to scream, to fight against the process that was turning me into a monument to my own curiosity. But even the desire to resist was fading, being edited out by narrative necessity. There has to be another way, Marcus said. I've spent 40 years looking for one. There isn't. The older me's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. But it's not as terrible as it sounds. The work is meaningful. You'll have access to knowledge that most people can't even imagine. You'll be protecting billions of lives from consequences they'll never even know existed. By giving up my own life. By transforming it into something more significant. How many people get the chance to be the crucial element in maintaining reality itself? Marcus was quiet for a long time, his flashlight beam fixed on a floor. I could see him working through the implications, weighing his options, coming to the same inevitable conclusion I had reached. Finally, he looked up. If I do this, if I take your place, what happens to you? The older me smiled, and for the first time since I'd met him, the expression looked genuinely happy. I get to rest. I get to become what Alex is becoming, part of the foundation, but no longer responsible for active maintenance. After 40 years of constant vigilance, of never knowing if today would be the day the whole system collapsed, I get to step back and let someone else carry the burden. And Alex will be there to help you understand the systems, to teach you the maintenance protocols. You won't be alone down here. You'll have the accumulated experience of everyone who came before. Marcus holstered his flashlight and removed his ranger hat, running his fingers through his hair. This is insane. Yes, the older me agreed. But it's also necessary. If I don't do this, reality ends. Reality as we know it. Time itself could become unstable. Past events might change retroactively. Future possibilities might collapse into impossibility. Everything that ever was or ever could be might simply stop. I watched Marcus make his choice, saw the exact moment when he accepted the weight of cosmic responsibility. His shoulders straightened. His expression hardened into resolve. He looked older suddenly, as if the decision itself had aged him. Okay, he said quietly. I'll do it. The older me nodded. Thank you. I know it's not easy, but you're making the right choice. What do I need to know? Everything. The maintenance schedules, the stability protocols, the proper procedures for guiding lost hikers through their recycled narratives. We'll start with the basics and work up to the complex stuff. As they talked, I felt the last of my agency slip away. I was becoming part of the scenery now, a living piece of furniture in the loop's elaborate mechanism. But strangely, I felt peaceful. The desperate need to escape, to fight against my fate, was fading into acceptance. This was bigger than me, bigger than any individual life or dream or aspiration. I was becoming part of something eternal and essential, a foundation stone in the architecture of existence itself. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but maybe it was the life I was meant for. Time moved differently after that, not just because of the loop's inherent temporal instability, but because my perception of time had fundamentally changed. Minutes could feel like hours as I watched Marcus learn the intricacies of reality maintenance. Days could pass in what felt like moments as the patterns repeated themselves with hypnotic regularity. The older me, the previous iteration, I suppose, began teaching Marcus the essential skills immediately. How to monitor the temporal flux readings on the advanced communication equipment. How to recognize when a loop cycle was beginning to destabilize. How to guide lost hikers back to their proper narrative positions without disrupting the larger pattern. The key, he explained, pointing to a complex diagram drawn on the stone wall, is understanding that every person who takes the fork is already part of a story. They're not making random choices, they're following narrative inevitability. Your job isn't to change their story, but to make sure it plays out smoothly. Marcus studied the diagram intently. What about free will? What about it? They chose to take the fork. They chose to follow the mysterious trail. They chose to investigate the impossible architecture. Every decision they make is authentic to their character and circumstances. The fact that those decisions lead to predictable outcomes doesn't make them less genuine. I found myself able to observe these conversations with a kind of detached fascination. My role as the previous active element gave me unique insight into the transition process. I could remember the weight of responsibility, the constant vigilance, the terrible knowledge that a single mistake could unravel everything. But I no longer felt those pressures directly. Instead, I experienced something like contentment, purpose without anxiety, meaning without stress. The older me, the one who had carried this burden for 4 decades, began to change as well. As Marcus took on more of the active responsibilities, the previous caretaker started to relax in ways I hadn't thought possible. The tension in his shoulders eased. His voice lost that edge of constant alertness. He even started to smile occasionally, genuine expressions of relief rather than the grim acceptance I'd seen before. It's strange, he confided to me during one of Marcus's sleep periods. I'd forgotten what it felt like not to be constantly worried about temporal cascade failures. Not to wake up every morning wondering if today would be the day someone broke the pattern beyond repair. Do you regret it? I asked. The 40 years? He considered the question carefully. No. It was necessary work. Important work. And I learned things that no other human being has ever learned. I mapped the boundaries between story and reality. I discovered that consciousness and narrative are more closely linked than anyone suspected. I became part of something eternal. But I'm tired. Bone deep, soul deep tired. Ready to step back and let someone else carry the active burden. We settled into a routine over the following weeks, though weeks might not be the right term for periods of time that didn't follow normal chronological rules. Marcus would handle the day-to-day maintenance, monitoring the equipment and guiding lost hikers through their recycled adventures. The previous caretaker would provide training and consultation, sharing decades of accumulated wisdom. And I would observe and learn, building up the knowledge base that would eventually help train the next iteration. Because there would be a next iteration. There always was. The loop operated on cycles that were roughly generational, 20 to 40 years between major transitions, depending on various factors. The previous caretaker had arrived in the early 1980s, taking over from someone who had been there since the station's establishment in 1969. Before that, the records were incomplete, but there were hints of an even earlier presence, possibly dating back to the late 1800s. The forest has always been strange, the previous caretaker explained during one of his history lessons. Indigenous peoples in this area had stories about places where time flowed backward, where the dead could speak to the living, where entering certain groves could transport you to the spirit world. Early European settlers reported similar phenomena, trails that led to impossible destinations, clearings where the seasons behaved differently, rocks that hummed with voices in unknown languages. So this isn't new. The station is new. The systematic management is new. But the underlying anomaly is ancient. Something about this particular geographical location makes reality flexible, responsive to narrative intention. The Forest Service stumbled into it by accident in the late 1960s during a routine survey, and they've been trying to contain it ever since. They know about this. The administration, some of them. There's a classified division that handles anomalous phenomena in national parks and forests. They provide the funding and equipment for Station Orion, but they let us handle the day-to-day operations. They learned a long time ago that bureaucratic oversight doesn't work well with paradoxical situations. Marcus was adapting to his new role with impressive speed. He had the same curiosity that had led both me and the previous caretaker into this situation, but he also had a natural aptitude for systematic thinking that made him excellent at managing complex patterns. Within a month, he was handling routine maintenance tasks independently. Within 2 months, he was making minor adjustments to the stability protocols based on his own observations. "You're a natural at this," the previous caretaker told him during one of their training sessions. "Better at it than I was when I started. You have an intuitive understanding of how narrative structures work." "I used to write stories," Marcus admitted, "before I became a ranger. Fiction, mostly. I always wondered how writers could make events feel inevitable while still surprising readers. Now I think I understand. It's about finding the patterns that already exist and guiding them toward their natural conclusions." The hikers continued to arrive on schedule, following their assigned roles in the recycled narratives. The couple from the video I'd found, speaking their mysterious language and marveling at impossible architecture. A solo backpacker who claimed to be searching for his missing brother. A group of college students on a ghost hunting expedition, each one playing their part perfectly, unaware that they were actors in a story that had been performed countless times before. Marcus learned to guide them with subtle touches, a misplaced trail marker here, a convenient equipment malfunction there, a helpful suggestion delivered at just the right moment. Nothing that felt like interference to the participants, but enough to keep their stories on track. The art, he explained to me during one of our conversations, is making sure they feel like they're making their own choices while gently steering them toward the outcomes the pattern requires. It's like being a director who's invisible to the actors. Does it bother you? Manipulating people like that? He considered the question. Are we manipulating them, or are we just helping them fulfill their own narrative destinies? They came here looking for mystery and adventure. We're making sure they find exactly what they were seeking, just in a way that doesn't destabilize reality. I was beginning to understand that this perspective, seeing human behavior as narrative function rather than individual agency, was essential to maintaining psychological stability in this role. The alternative was to go insane from the weight of responsibility and the constant awareness of how artificial everything had become. But artificial didn't mean meaningless. The stories we maintained, the patterns we preserved, the stability we provided, all of it served a larger purpose. Reality itself depended on our work, even if the beneficiaries would never know we existed. And gradually, I began to feel something I hadn't expected: pride. Pride in being part of something eternal and essential. Pride in the knowledge that my sacrifice was protecting billions of people from consequences they couldn't even imagine. Pride in the continuity we maintained, the careful stewardship of mysteries too large for normal human comprehension. The previous caretaker began to fade not long after Marcus had fully assumed his responsibilities. Not physically, he remained solid and present, but he became less central to the ongoing narrative. He spent more time sleeping, more time sitting quietly and staring at the stone walls with expressions of deep contentment. Sometimes I would catch him smiling at nothing, as if remembering private jokes from decades past. "It's almost time," he told me during one of our final conversations. "I can feel myself becoming part of the foundation, just like you did. Soon I'll be another constant element, another source of stability and accumulated wisdom, another voice in the collective memory of this place. Are you ready?" "More than ready. I've been ready for years. The only thing that kept me active was the knowledge that someone had to maintain the systems. Now that Marcus has taken over, I can finally rest." He faded gradually over the course of several weeks, becoming less responsive to direct conversation, more focused on internal experiences I couldn't share. But his presence remained, a calm, steady influence that I could feel even when he wasn't actively participating in events. And I began to understand that this was my future as well. Not erasure, but transformation. Not ending, but becoming part of something larger and more permanent than individual consciousness. The loop continued, patient and eternal, cycling through its stories and its storytellers with mechanical precision. And we became part of its rhythm, its memory, its ongoing narrative of preservation and protection. Somewhere above us, in the world of linear time and rational causality, life went on without ever knowing how close it had come to unraveling completely. Years passed, or what felt like years in a place where time moved according to narrative necessity rather than physical law. Marcus grew into his role as primary caretaker, developing an intuitive understanding of the loop's requirements that surpassed even the accumulated wisdom of his predecessors. He made improvements to the monitoring systems, refined the guidance protocols, even discovered new aspects of the anomaly that none of us had previously understood. "It's not just recycling stories," he explained during one of his research presentations. "It's evolving them. Each iteration is slightly different, incorporating new elements while maintaining the essential structure. The loop is learning, adapting, becoming more sophisticated over time." I found this insight fascinating, though my ability to engage actively with new information was gradually diminishing. Like the previous caretaker before me, I was becoming more of a repository than a participant. My memories remained intact, my knowledge available when needed, but my agency was slowly transferring to the deeper systems of the station. It wasn't unpleasant. If anything, it was liberating. The constant worry about making correct decisions, about maintaining vigilance against catastrophic failure, was being lifted from my shoulders. I was becoming part of the solution rather than responsible for implementing it. New hikers continued to arrive, following their predetermined paths through carefully maintained narratives. Some were obvious repeats, the same characters I'd observed during my early time in the station. Others seemed to be variations on familiar themes, slight modifications to test the stability of the pattern. Marcus handled them all with growing confidence and skill. He developed an almost supernatural ability to predict which guidance techniques would work with which personality types. A misplaced camping supply for the overprepared hiker who needed to learn self-reliance. A convenient trail marker for the lost soul who needed to feel like they were making their own discoveries. A carefully timed equipment failure for the group that needed to learn cooperation. The key, he told me during one of our increasingly rare direct conversations, is understanding that everyone who comes here is already looking for something. Our job isn't to give them what they expect, but to help them find what they actually need. And what do they need? To be part of a story that matters. To have their choices carry weight, their actions affect outcomes, their presence make a difference. The loop provides that. It gives them adventures that feel completely authentic because, from their perspective, they are completely authentic. I was beginning to understand why the previous caretakers had found peace in this role. There was something deeply satisfying about being part of a system that provided meaning and purpose to random lives. We weren't just maintaining temporal stability. We were serving as custodians of human narrative, ensuring that the fundamental human need for story and significance could be fulfilled even in the most impossible circumstances. The previous caretaker had faded almost completely by this point, becoming a presence I could sense but no longer directly communicate with. He was part of the station's memory now, his accumulated knowledge and experience woven into the very structure of the place. When Marcus needed information about historical precedents or alternative approaches to difficult situations, the answers would simply appear, written on previously blank pages, whispered through the communication systems, discovered in newly appeared documentation. The station itself was becoming more sophisticated as well, incorporating the consciousness and expertise of each successive caretaker into its operational matrix. What had started as a simple monitoring post had evolved into something approaching a hybrid of technology and awareness, a facility that could anticipate needs and provide solutions without direct human intervention. But it still needed active caretakers. The patterns required conscious guidance, the narratives needed skill direction, and the hikers deserved someone who understood their humanity even while managing their stories. And eventually, Marcus would need a replacement as well. I could see the signs beginning to manifest. Subtle changes in the loop's behavior, slight variations in the arrival patterns of new hikers, minor adjustments to the temporal flux readings that suggested the system was preparing for another transition. Somewhere out there, another curious ranger was probably receiving an assignment to clear trail markers in the western boundary of Black Ridge National Forest. Another person with the right combination of skills and temperament was approaching the fork that shouldn't exist, the trail that appeared only to those who were meant to find it. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked Marcus during one of our final direct conversations. Taking this responsibility, he considered the question for a long time before answering. "I regret the life I didn't get to live. The career I didn't have, the relationships I didn't form, the ordinary experiences I'll never know. But I don't regret the life I chose to live instead. This matters more than anything I could have accomplished in the normal world, even though no one will ever know what you've done, especially because no one will ever know. The best protection is invisible protection. The most effective guardians are the ones nobody realizes exist." I felt myself beginning to fade in the same way the previous caretaker had. Not disappearing, but transforming into something more fundamental and less individual. My consciousness was being distributed throughout the station systems, my knowledge and experience becoming part of the collective wisdom that would guide future caretakers. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like coming home. The last thing I remember as a distinct individual consciousness was the sound of footsteps on the stairs, careful, curious footsteps belonging to someone who had found something unexpected and was trying to make sense of it. Another iteration, another choice, another person about to discover that some responsibilities are too important to abandon. Marcus looked up at the ceiling, listening to the footsteps with a patient expression of someone who had been expecting this moment for years. "Right on schedule," he said quietly. And the loop continued, patient and eternal, cycling through its stories and its storytellers with mechanical precision. If you ever hike Black Ridge National Forest, if you ever find yourself on the Briar Loop Trail, following GPS coordinates that seem slightly off, walking through terrain that feels familiar but wrong, if you see a narrow, unmarked fork with no signpost, a path that seems to beckon with possibilities and mysteries, turn around. Don't let curiosity override your survival instincts. Don't assume that every trail is meant to be walked. Because the disappearance trail doesn't want casual hikers. It wants stories, and it needs someone to tell them.